Today's episode is brought to you by EliteFTS.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help Elite FTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of us for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, Elite FTS has it.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the Elite FTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. What's going on, guys? We are back with podcast number 121. Before getting this rolling, I want to thank our sponsor, MerrickHealth.com. They are a telehealth platform focusing on hormone optimization and preventative medicine. I always screw that one up because I always think medicine is going to be the preventative medicine. Essentially, I've talked to you guys about this before. They've been sponsoring the podcast now for over a month, and I've been keeping you updated with kind of what's going on. So they offer two platforms or two ways to get your labs done, essentially. The one way is just get your labs done, as I've been doing for years, and you've been probably doing it yourself for years as well. And if you know what you're doing, fine. You know, you got the labs. But as you heard Eric Serrano say on the podcast Sunday when I showed him my lab reports, it's the most thorough labs that he's ever seen. It's a clean look. It's different than what you would normally see, where it's just kind of laid out. And that's what most people probably are going to do. The second option is they have is guided optimization. And with that, that's where I'm kind of in the middle of that now. That's where one of their hormone and preventative health professionals, could be a doctor or could be a nurse practitioner who specializes in hormone health, takes you through and shows you the results of your labs, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Now, what I have my update on, and I'm speaking with them, this is ridiculous. That's it. Later this week, this is my lab report, right? Now, I'm not this fucked up, right? But what they did in the lab report is they go through and they show, you know, what each lab was, what it means, if it's off a little bit, what you need to do to correct that. There's some things in here that are supplement related. There are other things in here, I need to do steady state cardio. And they're explaining why I need to do the steady state cardio. There are some recommendations in here as far as prescriptions that I will speak with their practitioner about. Then again, after I have that conversation, and I already knew most of this because I spoke to Eric about my labs on Sunday. So I'm kind of like, what are they going to say compared to what Eric's going to say? And there's a couple things that I have, which I'm not going to put on the record, that they're off. They're always off. That if somebody would see that, they're going to be like, oh, you're going to die. Right. But it's a genetic component. And it's inversely been related to my testosterone. Right. So usually when the testosterone's high, this will be high, and they're going to be like, oh, you need to go off, and, you know, all this other kind of stuff. Where this has become such a pain in the ass, because you know how it is when you go to see a doctor. Oh, yeah. No matter what you go in there for, right? It's hormones. Oh, yeah. You can have cancer. It's hormones, right? Mm-hmm. So they just jump to that conclusion. Where I carry my medical records anymore. So as soon as they say that, I'm like, actually, here's my labs for the last 4 years, and you'll see what you're talking about. It has an inverse relationship. So actually what you're telling me is I need to take more shit. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So I'm real impressed with where Merrick Health has done as far as this lab report. I'll speak with them. You know, they're, like I said, their practitioner in a couple days, and their website is MerrickHealth.com. You get 10% off their first order with the discount code Table Talk. The other sponsor of the podcast is EliteFTS.com, obviously. First order, 10% off first order again using the code Table Talk, and our limited edition apparel that directly supports the podcast is we're almost sold out of what we have that we talked about last week. The link is in the description. Now I would get over and pick that up. It's not the tee I'm wearing now, but it's an example of the tee, and help support the podcast. With all that said, now I want to welcome Matt Wenning on the podcast. I've known Matt for probably longer than either one of us want to admit.
20 years at least.
Oh yeah, for 20 years, maybe a little bit more. So there's some things that we're going to discuss today, some topics that going through your guys' questions that we're going to go through. And obviously we're going to go off topic a lot. So we're going to talk about, our time at Westside Barbell. There was a little bit of crossover, but not even enough crossover that I can really remember it. He would probably remember more than I will. And there's a reason why, which we were just talking about a little bit earlier. So we'll talk about that, some of the things that were a little bit different. We're going to talk about, there were a lot of questions, and this was intriguing to me because it was more block-oriented compared to conjugate-oriented. And to me and to you as well, it's kind of the same. Like conjugate, if done properly, is going to be phasic.
Yep.
Or it should be phasic. And even when I was at Westside, it was phasic, but it really it wasn't presented to be phasic, but you peaked for meet.
Yeah.
But then you had, after the meet.
Which makes phases.
Which makes phases, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that just because I think all training, all properly structured training is going to be block oriented to some degree. Even linear has got different blocks built into it. We're not talking like Ursuline blocks or bump-up blocks or stuff like that. But I definitely want to talk about that because just the way a lot of these questions were framed is kind of misinformed.
Yes.
So just distinguishing the difference there is going to be a good one. We're going to tap on the overhead press. It just seems to be a question that I get quite frequently, and there's a bunch of them in there, for you as well. And then just the other crap, like what got you into powerlifting, where you see powerlifting going. But I'm going to have to ask you about this turd thing because I don't know anything about it.
So you want to start there?
So well, let's start with SWIS.
Okay.
Sunday we announced the SWIS Symposium. Matt's going to be one of the presenters. He's presented at how many?
3 of them.
3 of them now. So he'll be back again. So what topics we're still kind of figuring that out.
Ken was talking about me doing one on squats, so probably some kind of technical and then some kind of theory, I'd imagine, and then we're going to be on panels, so I'm sure that'll be us.
Yeah.
And then we're going to fill in with probably small things as well. I imagine because it's here in town for us that it's probably going to be the best one they've ever had.
I think so. I think just having it back and having it in the States
huge
is going to be a huge thing.
Well, in my opinion, it's so easy to fly into Columbus compared to Toronto. It's a lot easier to get around. It's cheaper to stay. I think it's just a better venue spot, and it's our hometown. So, most of the people he was trucking up to Toronto were coming from here.
They were. They
Toronto,
were.
JL.
There's more as well.
Yeah.
And there's less of a pain in the ass because it's a lot of, myself speaking, I really never had a passport before. I gotta get a passport just to go do this thing.
I know, yeah.
And then all the crap associated with there. So that link is in the bio as well. So I just wanted to tap on that because a lot of the people that I'm going to have on the podcast moving forward have been at SWIS, and there's a lot of them because the other thing I'm starting to get inundated with is people that want to speak.
Yeah.
And it's like, Ken's getting them, I'm getting them. But we also have a group of people that have spoke at, how many did you speak?
3.
3?
Yeah.
Like between 3 and 8, there's
that core group.
There's a core group, right? That we're going to run the people that we really don't know, through this core group. So it's people can, DM me all they want or DM Ken all they want. That's great. We'll put them on a list, but it's still, we're not the ones making this.
Well, I'll tell you what, though. I mean, and coming from personal experiences, if you're going to speak at SWIS, you better have your shit together because it's the top people in the world. I mean, I was humbled at every talk that I went to that wasn't mine, how much information I was absorbing and going, holy shit, I didn't think about that. Holy shit, I didn't think about this. I find that the SWIS conference, in my personal opinion, not just because I'm associated with it, it's probably one of the highest educational experiences you're going to have. And even a base level knowledge at that, you're going to be behind.
Yes.
I think you and I and guys like us can take a lot away from that because we have studied this our whole life. But I would find it very hard as a beginner to come in and learn what these people are talking about because some things I still have to look up.
Yes.
And that's saying a lot.
Okay. Yeah, now let's get into the whole turd thing because I'm really intrigued about that.
Okay, I'll give you the cliff notes so we won't go too crazy on it. So I'm in graduate school. I'm getting my master's. I'm in my first year. I have no fucking money. I'm making $500 a month as a stipend. I'm working 60 hours a week in the weight room with every Division I sport. It's brutal. And the class loads weren't as high as undergrad, but the classes themselves were much harder, much more research driven. We were doing so much work on projects. And so you're just overloaded for 2 years. And I had bought this big thing of Iron Mind protein, and I had in my work desk from the year before, because I was not only a graduate, but a student strength coach, but I also was one of the first undergraduate paid strength coaches. So I was already a great lifter, and Wade needed help. And he's like, well, we'll pay you some money per hour. Come in and help me with these teams. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I got my foot in the door in a Division I level weight room with a strength coach that played pro football. That had he was a master CSCC in the MAC and had all the connections. He knew Mad Dog. He knew all these huge guys. He knew Boyd Epley, and they were friends. And so for me, that was a huge honor to do that. So, but I'm broke as shit. And I had enough money saving up as a welder to pay for school for all 4 years, but I didn't have a lot of extra money. So I get out of my desk and I'm like, well, shit, protein doesn't go bad. So I make this big ass fucking like 60 ounce thing because I'm starving balls and I'm like 280 pounds. And so I drink this massive protein shake. Well, not more than about 4 hours later, we had just won one of the big NIT tournaments at Ball State. So at that time, Ball State was one of the top basketball schools in the country. We barely lost to Duke in the NIT that year. We beat Kansas, right? I mean, we had a team.
Yeah.
And so Subway, the local Subways were giving everybody that had affiliation with the athletic program free Subway cards. So my buddy's like, well, let's go to Subway and we'll get something to eat. So we got these free Subway cards. I'm like, all right, cool. So I had this big protein shake in my stomach. So then I go get this foot long, double meat, everything on it. I eat that. The next morning I get up and have breakfast. Well, no shitting has occurred. So by about 1 o'clock, I'm starting to get these dry heave sweats. And I think I'm just getting the flu. It's not my stomach that's hurting yet. I'm just getting fluish and I'm getting like just feeling bad. So I tell Wade, man, I need to go home. I'm fucking dying. He goes, oh, that's cool, man. Take the afternoon off. So I go home and that's when the stomach pain started to kick in. And I'm like, I'm thinking back in the timeline going, oh shit, that protein. So I get the protein bag and I look, expired in like 2002 and it was 2004. So it was 2 years past expiration. And so now all of a sudden I'm panicked because now I know. So I'm trying to shit. I'm in the fetal position in an old blanket on the floor. I'm dying. And finally, I'm just like, I don't have very much family back home at that time. My mom had moved to take over part of the sections of the VA. So my grandmother was in town, the one that just passed a couple weeks ago. And that was the one I took on all the motorcycle rides. So I call her and I'm like, Grandma, I need to go to the hospital. And she's like, I fucking knew it. All that heavy weightlifting, you were going to hurt something, right? And I'm like, no, Grandma, it's my fucking stomach. And she's like, oh, okay, fine. So she comes and gets me and I'm crawling to the car. I mean, it's so much pain, I can't bear it. I think I'm going to fucking die. So I get to the ER and good or bad, this doctor had just got out of school. She was actually pretty hot as a girl. And she's like, well, let's take an x-ray and see what's going on. She comes back with this spooked look in her face, like somebody just did something insane in front of her. She goes, you have the largest intestinal blockage I've ever seen in my life. And it's this white mass, and I don't know what it is. I go, I know what it is. I said, it's this fucking protein that I drank that was expired. She goes, oh, that was a smart move. So they're trying all this shit. My grandma's sitting right there. They got fingers in my ass, you know, like, and I'm so much pain, I don't even care. I'm not even embarrassed anymore.
Yeah.
So now I know what pregnant girls feel like, you know. They got their shit flowed out, and they're not even care. There's so much pain. And so anyway, they give me this special soap that breaks down anything and I got to jam this thing up my ass and let it drain all this, it's like 2,000 milliliters of fluid. And they put me in a bathroom next to a lady that's getting ready to have a kid, and I can hear her through the wall whispering at her mom. And I'm like, when this demon comes out, it's going to be a fucking disaster. So it's like a cartoon. It's flowing over the side of the bowl. I mean, it's disgusting me. It's my own shit, right? And I ended up losing somewhere around 15 to 20 pounds.
Oh my God.
That day. I mean, I felt like I had never had at that time below like a 36-inch waist, and I probably was sitting around 29.
Oh my God.
So that was the story, i.e. don't drink bad protein. You know?
No, oh my God. Now I know why people were asking about that.
She said if I would have waited probably another 12 to 24 hours, I probably would have ruptured and basically went septic in my stomach. She goes, you were getting ready to perforate your entire intestines.
Holy cow.
I mean, I had food backed up from a day and a half on top of this locked up protein drink, and it was, oh God, it was the worst fucking thing I ever smelled in my life. It's like a Trax truck full of Mexican baby diapers. You know.
How long did it take you to feel normal?
I'd say about 2 to 3 days. I felt better, but you know, it was one of those things that scared the shit out of me. And to be honest with you, I have never been a huge fan of protein drinks after that. Obviously, I mean, I still will drink them now occasionally, but for me, it's mostly real food now, and a lot of that's because of that particular incident.
Well, yeah, I mean, you never know what's on the shelf. And plus, a supplement is a supplement.
Exactly.
Which
a
lot of people kind of miss that whole concept with that. When you got started in powerlifting as a teen.
Yeah, 13.
Right? So 13. How did that happen?
Well, okay, so I'm 11 years old, and I'm a good swimmer. I'm actually a great swimmer, and I'm a really good sprinter. My specialty is a 50 free. And I'm a bigger kid at the time, so I'm a fast swimmer and I'm a big kid. But swim coaches don't understand jack shit about weightlifting, as we both very well know. And so you just need to swim longer and more volume, and you'll get faster. And we know that that's not the case. And I was always type 2 fiber. And looking back now, being educated, because I could never, after about 200 meters, I would just flatten out. I just had nothing left. Well, you're just out of shape, you know. I wasn't built for it. So I wanted to play 7th grade football bad. And from my car accident, I had broken my legs, and I was up to cast to my pelvis for a whole year. My upper body, I was an upper body dominant swimmer, so my shoulders and my lats and my arms were already pretty developed for being a kid. And I lived about 1.5 miles away from a YMCA. And so there was one of the great athletes of my particular class group. His name was Nate. He was going to the Y. His mom had given him a membership, and he was training. He's like, well, why don't you just come work out with me? And he was like the star athlete at that time. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. So I walk in, and I'm in this YMCA, and it's an old Nautilus type setup. It's not nice. It's really shitty. But just so happened that there were 2 guys that were national caliber lifters in their own generation. Jim Dawson had deadlifted 722 in 1970, and Tim Smith had benched 500 at 181 raw. And these guys were in this gym, and they see me, and they think I'm in fucking high school, and I'm in grade school. And they're like, holy shit, you're in 6th grade? And I'm like, yeah, I want to play football for 7th grade. And you know, like everybody else, you know, you go in, and you're like, well, I want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger to play football. And you realize that you're not built like that.
Yeah.
But so those guys know you need to be a power lifter. And so Dawson from the 70s generation starts handing me magazines of Larry Pacifico, Bill Kazmaier, Eddie Cohen from the 80s, like all these old PLUSAs. And I'm like, I look at Kazmaier, and I'm like, that's what I want. I want that build. I want that strength. I want that intensity. And Dawson's like, you got the tools to get that far if you want to work hard enough. So I do a non-sanctioned bench meet at 13. I'd been training for about a year, and I smoked 250. And so what Dawson and Timmy did was they would let me do contests, but they would never let me max. They would let me go, man, I think I had 50 pounds more. Yeah, I know you do. You wait till the next meet. So I would go, this is just a case in point. I benched 250 easy. Then 7 months later, I do another meet. I bench like 280, like boom, smoke it. Next meet, 315. So by the time I'm a freshman in high school, I'm benching 315, which is insane.
Yeah.
But 315 was easy. They never let me max. And I remember the first time I actually even strained on a weight in a contest, I was 19 years old, and I won the first Teenage Worlds. And that's when I had first met you and Louie. I had just won world championships in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'd come back and went to the Arnold, and all you guys were walking out, and I came up, and Louie was surrounded with you and Halbert and Jerry Obradovich and Kenny Patterson, and I was like, hey, Louie, I'm Matt Wenning, and I'd really like to come over and check you out, because I had the PLUSAs. I had all of his articles at that time, and I had read them. And to be honest with you, like most of you guys probably reading your stuff and my stuff at an advanced level, I didn't fucking understand shit. And I had been lifting for 7 or 8 years. But I'm looking at this going, he's talking about getting faster to get stronger? That doesn't make any sense. He's talking about stretch reflex. He's talking about all these physics, which we both know he didn't have 100% right, but the point came across correct. And he started talking about chains, because at that time, bands weren't really being used yet, because Dick Hartzell hadn't brought them down to us.
Yeah, we haven't even had them.
Right, we didn't even have them. So I started reading all this stuff, and I'm like, there's got to be a better way, because I had gotten up to this 500 bench, but my shoulders felt like shit. My elbows were beat up. My wrists were beat up, because the guys I was training with got me to a certain point, but I was already beyond them at 19, and they had nothing left to show me. Not to bang on them, but it was time for me to find a new mentor. Like I say, and I try to tell people all the time, if you're the strongest or the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. So where did I need to go? I needed to travel 3 hours away to Columbus, Ohio to be around guys like you to take my game to the next level. And I was the only guy in the USAPL because if you remember correctly, the USAPL started in Indiana. It started in Fort Wayne. There was a guy named Mike Overdeer. He was the president, and he lived an hour north of me. So he's holding all the best meets. They were called Blacksmith Opens. And then there was another big meet that was being held up in Chicago close to Eddie Cohen. So I started off in the USAPL, ADFPA, where the rules were, I think, were overly strict.
Yeah, at that time, yeah.
They were berserk.
They probably still are, but yeah.
The equipment was nothing. I mean, we were squatting in Z suits and shit-ass gold knee wraps. And but what I learned is that my technical skill was highly increased. I think that gave me a huge advantage when I went pro because I was already used to squatting deeper. So I always looked mechanical like a machine doing everything because I started off having to do everything perfect. And I think that guys want to start at the higher tiers of the federations, if you want to call it that maybe don't have the same rules. Not that they're worse or better. You just don't get the strictness. I could adapt myself to any meet. That's why I was a good meat lifter. If the judges were judging low, I went lower. Now, maybe it cut 50 pounds off of my squat, but I still won. And so that's when everything started to transition into conjugate. And then me starting to have a better understanding of what to do. And I remember taking some of this knowledge back to Dr. Kramer. So Dr. Kramer was at Ball State at the time. And he is the most published strength conditioning researcher in the country, if not the world. And he was an adjunct professor with Zatsiorsky. And I bring him back all this stuff and go, look what we're doing. We're doing this max work and this speed work. And he looks at me and he's laughing his ass off. And I'm like, what's so damn funny? You're not teaching us this in school. He gives me the book, Zatsiorsky's Greenback from 94. And he goes, why don't you read that? And I read it and I go, shit, this is where Louie's getting all this stuff from. Now, it didn't have the practicality in it. So I give Louie a lot of credit for that. But the system was laid in stone from 50 years ago. And Kramer's laughing at me because I think it's something new, something innovative, something. And that's what I think people don't understand. I talk this with Paul Quinn all the time. There is nothing in the exercise world that's new. Everything's regurgitated. So what you think is the new in thing was the new in thing 20 years ago. You just weren't around to see it. And I remember Paul Quinn showing me his personal library before he passed away. He had a book that was French because he could read 4 or 5 different languages. He had a book in France that showed almost every like Tate presses and not Wenning Warmups, but say all kinds of different other things. And they were already there. They just named something different and they were foreign language. And this was like in the 40s. And I was just thinking, you know, it's so crazy that we think we reinvent the wheel all the time. But in reality, we might reinvent the purpose of the wheel, but we don't invent the wheel itself.
Exactly. And I was under the same thing happened because when I came to Westside after college, the degree is in exercise science nutrition, and you know I read pretty much every Soviet sport review at the time and NSCA journals, all that kind of stuff. So I have and people are showing me Louie stuff, you know, while I'm in college. I'm like, man, fucking 40%, 50%, that's
go heavy or go home.
Day. It's like whatever. It's just whatever. You know, it just didn't make any sense. Then after, and even the first year at Westside, I butt heads with Louie because it's like, show me these fucking books you're talking about. Like, I get it, but just because he would say, I got these Russian books. Well, fucking show me. I mean, what's the, I'm in your house. Like, just where are these things at? And then he pulled out some of the old, they're not Medvedev books manuals, and stuff like that. And I'm flipping through there. I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of see this, you know. And then the Science and Practice of Strength Training was published. And then I'm reading that. I'm like, okay, now I see it. Then I went back and started looking back through the Soviet sport reviews and some of those other things. And even in the NSCA journal, there was a series by Spazov. And my bias was it was there, right? But Louie had a skill to extract it and you know kind of put that, but it still was all there, right? But I was so stuck in this linear periodized bias because that's what everything was being pushed.
Well, it's like we all did. You know, and linear periodization did work for me and get me stronger than 99% of the people at that age, but it didn't get me world class. And it would have put so much mileage on me by the time I was in my mid-20s, I'd have had to retire. There had to be a better way. And, you know, if you listen to Louie's old stuff or you understand what we're talking about, what you realize is the conjugate system was developed in that particular manner in order to enhance the mileage purposes so that the athletes could last multiple medal runs. That's why it was made. You know, there's other ways, like the Bulgarians used a max effort only method multiple times in a week, but they would get guys to one medal run. They'd start off with hundreds, if not thousands of athletes and come down to 3 or 4 that could compete at the Olympics. And then they were all broken up and beat up by the time they were wearing one medal. And the Soviets figured out there had to be a better way, a smarter way to get better and to stay better longer. And that's where everybody should be asking these questions, which is frustrating for both of us, because in reality, if you want to be great at something, for most of us, like you and I think we came into Westside with desire, passion, and some genetics, but we were always lifting with guys that have better genetics than us.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you beat that? You beat them by outlasting them.
Yeah.
And so if you train like an idiot, you might be able to do that for a handful of years, but it's not going to show you true progression unless you can last at least at bare minimum a decade.
Yeah. I mean, the one frustrating thing for me throughout that whole time period was I had 15 years of competing. You know, the majority of my meets, looking back through meet history, was because once at Westside is 1 or 2 per year.
Sure.
Happened before that. And coming to Westside was the last flip I had. Because in my mind, I was done, man.
Yeah,
my pecs just had to be reattached. My shoulders were trashed. My everything fucking hurt like crazy all over.
And how old are you?
It's just out of college.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Now, it was a long college stay, but 2 years later than most people would be. I'm not good with dates, but say 89, 88, right around there. And then the 4 years, even 3 or 4 years before that, my total was going nowhere.
Yeah.
I was just hoping that I could put my best numbers together and not break something else off.
Yeah.
And then meeting with Louie, he's telling me this other stuff, and he's like, I guarantee you can get better. And at that point, I just want a better total.
Sure.
But you need to change all these other things.
Well, and that's the hardest part for people to understand is they have to be willing to learn something new and let go what they thought worked behind. And that's what you find is such a big problem that we deal with is people don't let go of what got them where they got them, but they don't understand it's not going to get them to the next step.
Yeah, I can guarantee at best I would have had 1 more year after a surgery. I had 14 more years. So it's, that's where, I strongly, I mean, everybody knows I'm biased towards conjugate. Obviously, it's for a reason. I mean, it added all that. Plus, you see what we see going through there.
Yep.
Now, because we were talking a little bit earlier, there was a little bit of crossover because my main Westside days where I started in the boxer and there was a commercial gym.
Yep, I remember that.
And then the Dimmers commercial gym, that I don't even want to say I was there because it was just traveling back and forth. Then he moved to this place on Sullivan, which I call the boxer in the basement gym.
Yep.
And it was the worst hole I've ever trained in. There's holes in the floor.
And for people that don't realize, the west side of Columbus in those years was completely terrible.
This was, but I mean, it worked, right? And there's no monolith, there's squat stands, and there's a lot of history people really don't understand, as well. So that's when I started, but I moved into Demers. It was the people that moved into Demers were Louie, myself, Chuck, Kenny. That moved out. That were there when we moved out. Actually, Kenny wasn't there when we moved out. So moving into Demers, that made it all the way through whatever 14 years or whatever that was Louie, Kenny, Chuck. I'm sorry.
George.
Louie, well, George came in a couple. George is really, really close. I'd say George. So, I mean, it's a handful of people. So, to me, when I think of Westside, it's not West Belt. It's Demers because I was at West Belt maybe a couple years. Yeah, you kind of came in that transition period.
I started lifting with you guys on an irregular basis in '99. Yeah, so I was at the black painted windows Demerist, probably about 2.5, 3 years before they moved it to Wilson.
Okay.
And I did notice the vibe change was different, and that's I think what you're getting into. I noticed in your generation, you, Kenny, and George, and Louie, you guys all and Chuck all looked at each other as somewhat equals psychologically, meaning that when you brought an idea, guys would listen and they'd either do it or not do it, but they would try it. The difference was when I got to Westside is Louie already had this plan set in place that he felt that everything he knew worked, but what I think he was starting to not understand is that everybody was a little different. I needed more volume and I needed more raw work to be really good. I lost hypertrophy very quick if I trained in gear too often. The same thing happened to Greg. And so when we started to put in new different types of ideas, so what I would do as a wave, this is what really would get Louie pissed, is I would do a completely raw squat week because, as you know, at that time, Louie was in his 50s and he could not squat raw. He was too beat up. So it made him feel bad that he couldn't lift with us because we were lifting in shorts and a belt, and then he'd have to put a bunch of shit on. We didn't care, but to him, it hurt his ego a little. And what I found is I would do one day completely raw, one day with a little bit of gear, and then one day with maxed out gear. And then I would go back and rotate it. And that created a deload in and of itself neurologically because obviously you can't lift as much raw as you can in gear. So it's waving those weights around to where I'm constantly going as hard as I can in that given environment for that week. And so Louie's like, well, fine, fuck it, try it and see if it works. So we do a 15-week wave of it. Greg goes and breaks the all-time world record, and I go from number 5 in the world to number 2. And now I'm like, oh shit. Well, the only thing I needed to fix then was my bench was stuck at 700, which was a great bench for a 3-lift because the shirts weren't crazy yet. And I was already benching probably 585 raw when I was doing 700. So I was a strong raw capacity bencher even then. And I go up and do a seminar with Bill Crawford. And Bill Crawford shows me this crazy technique of flaring the elbow, tucking. And JL was the one that initially taught me that. And you remember Louie being super pissed about him going and learning from Crawford. But I had to take his name off the board. So I go learn it, and my bench goes from 700 to 800 in 9 months. So now I'm the strongest equipped bencher at Westside as a 3-lift guy. Well, you would think that would get praise, but it didn't. It got a lot of backlash because it wasn't the style that Louie felt would work. And in your generation, I feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel that if you brought something new to the table and it worked, it stayed.
Kinda. It was, this brings up some other questions because what the interesting thing is, I don't think we've ever talked about, the differences that transpire between those is through the whole Dimmers time, we really never used gear. And I think that was a big negative, right? Because we would just use briefs, to be able to squat in, just your France double briefs or whatever it was. I mean, you're sitting on the box with the bar. It's not like they're helping. It's just support.
Yeah.
I can remember never putting my squat suit on or wraps on until a meet.
Yeah.
Never putting the bench shirt on ever until a meet. Later on, towards the back end of those years, we would put it on maybe once or twice. In an 8-week period of time, just to see if you could get shit to touch. It never would. But it'd be like, fuck it, it will touch in the meet. And looking back, I think I would have squatted a hell of a lot more because I'm looking at what my max effort work was compared to guys that came later. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. Wait a fucking minute. They're squatting like 100, 150 pounds more.
You gotta remember, at Westside, it did not learn how to structure that gear training until they got the pressure from Big Iron Barbell. Because Big Iron and Hussey was putting gear on every week, which I don't think is right either. There's a happy medium. So I was doing gear every 3 weeks. And that's when I noticed for me and Greg and a lot of the other guys I trained that were world record holders at that time, that worked really well for us. And I think a lot of it was because we just had 3 different goals, 3 different weeks, so we weren't burning out. Whereas Louie had more of that mindset of hammer, 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 that same intensity every time and without rotation of environment, meaning gear. And that would burn you out faster than anything. I mean, that's what people don't realize. If you want to see how fast the NFL transitions players, come and see back in the heyday how fast lifters didn't stay at Westside. And why? Because they burn the fuck out.
There was also with the ideas and stuff like that. It's funny, right? Because it was really more conversation of, the people that you were talking about. So let's say we come up with something, then it becomes, well, how can we make it seem like this is Louie's idea?
And see, we weren't good at that.
So
we wanted the credit. So
we were more along the lines of somehow or another we need to make it look like this is his idea, so that it can be implemented.
And see, I should have sat down and actually had that talk with you because I think that would have saved a lot of our issues. I come in and Louie is always looking at me as like, hey, this is Matt Wenning. He's got a master's degree in biomechanics. Let's have him help him write articles. You remember I was writing articles for Westside Barbell, and I was answering all the emails at the time. Well, with doing that, I felt that I had his trust to try new things that were outside of his realm. And what I realized real fast is that was not true.
No. And it was. I mean, there's. I always say he's kind of like the. You remember the movie Animal House?
Oh yeah.
Like fucker. He's like, no. That was like that was like him. So you had to learn how to kind of manage that, but then also understand that he's really not your friend. That he's your coach, but not really a coach, training partner type of thing. You kind of keep those things separate. So there was that. For me, the thing with I mean, we also had it was a tighter crew, but it was a smaller gym. So you got a smaller gym now. So when you got a gym that's say 400, 600 square foot, you know, people have to be there to help run the mile lift, do all this other stuff.
The energy's there.
The energy's there, and it's built into the training because you're squatting and, you know, crews and it's go, 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 go. You know how that, you know, so, you know, 2 people are squatting and then don't do anything else. Everybody else should take care of, you know, running the rack, changing the box height. All that should be done by somebody else, not the people squatting. And that's kind of how it was. Then when we went to West Belt, it's, you know, it's like, well, where the fuck's everybody at? Because the reverse hyper now is way on the other side of the gym. The glute ham race is on the other side. So, you know, we go through our squats. Louie was my, you know, sidekick back and forth squat guy, whatever you want to call that. And we get through that and it'd be like, okay, well, the next group is up. You know, it's like, well, where the fuck is, you know, they all, they're doing their accessories. They moved, it lost that part. And some of it's probably good, some of it's bad. Some of it's good because they could focus on doing the things that they needed to do. But the other thing which you touched on, you know, when we were talking earlier, is a lot of times you say you need to do this, right? So then you start doing it, then literally the next day, or sometimes the same day, what the fuck are you doing that for? You know, it's like, well, you just told me, and anybody that's ever trained at Westside will share exactly the same story, right? Because it's funnier than hell, you know, and it's like, well, then what the fuck? You know, it's like, what the hell are we supposed to do? Then you just realize, okay, you know, Chuck squats X, you know, and at that time it was close. It's like Chuck squats about this, so I should be able to handle about this, but his work capacity's here. I got to dial my work capacity down a little bit. You know, then you would just, or Rob's squatting this is right where I'm at. You just match that, but Rob doesn't, he likes to do a couple things and leave. So you would gauge what you're doing off, you know, everybody else. But like yourself, I was during a lot of probably the back half of my period there, because the online and answering the questions and all that, I'm front-facing guy kind of for Westside, you know, so helping Louie with the seminars, consulting, same thing like what you were doing. And then I leave, and then I believe you were next to be that front-facing voice.
So I'm trying to remember his name now. Who was the guy that ended up moving to South Carolina about the same time? Stafford.
Yes,
Stafford. I took Stafford was doing all the emails.
Yes.
And he was like, "Hey man, be careful because it's an open website email, and there's a lot of stupid shit on there that I just get all this spam mail." And I was like, "Cool." So a lot of this times we get these Westside, and there'd be 60 emails, and 40 of them were trash, and you had to sift through them a bunch. And Louie paid me to do the emails, which I didn't care. I thought it was a great honor. But the big thing was I took over for Stafford because Stafford was kind of the more cognitive person when you left. He was kind of the guy that was carrying the torch as far as I felt the education side. He was very smart. And so when I come in, Louie's like, well, this kid's got a master's and he's super strong already. I can put him at that position. And so that was a great honor for me right out of graduate school. And then one of the big things I think that started to become a big rift for us is Buddy Morris was coming down, and he was at the Browns at the time. He was coming down, and somehow Buddy and I got to talking, and he didn't know me from anybody. He just knew I was a big kid, and he's talking to Louie, and Louie's like, yeah, you know, Matt's got a master's, and he squats 1,000 pounds, and he's super strong. And I see Buddy Morris' eyes light up because he needs a new assistant because what's his name's getting ready to leave. I'm trying to remember what's his name. Tom. Yeah. Tom's getting ready to leave. And so I said, hey, Louie, do you think it'd be a good idea? I can get a job with the Browns. This would be awesome. And he acts happy for me in my face, but behind the scenes he's like, I'm gonna lose Matt. And so he stops putting work into me, he stops showing me attention, and the volatile side starts to show. And I didn't even know what I did. I'm just thinking, this is a Westside Barbell guy getting ready to get a job at a pro team. This could be a huge, but what he's seeing is I'm giving up my lifting.
Well, yeah.
You see, because that's all he cares about is that damn board.
No, while you're there, the way that because I've had to have, I remember having a conversation with AJ Roberts and some other people that moved in, and it's just kind of like, okay, Liz, here's what you're going into. You know, I never had this conversation with you, I don't believe.
No.
And I lay it all out, like, here's what you're going into. You know, you are like he's Bill Parcells and you're playing for the Patriots. You know, I don't want to say he owns you, but that's what it is. You know, so that's all he cares about. You know, he'll do anything for you while you're there. You know, and, you know, afterwards, not so much. But does any coach?
No.
You know what I'm saying? So you got to, when it's in perspective, it makes more sense.
Yeah. The hard part with me, I think, is when I grew up, Timmy and Dawson and the guys I was telling you that were world-class, national class lifters at the Y, they would bend over backwards even if I wasn't training with them. Yeah. And so that's the kind of loyalty that I was used to, and that's what initially what Louie had portrayed to me.
Don't get me wrong, I learned this the hard way.
Yeah, so we both did. Right? So but yeah, so that's kind of how that started, and then so by 2005 I finished my master's. I moved over full time, and Louie's ecstatic because now I'm there full time, and I squat my first 1,000 pounds in 2006, which was the craziest squat I'd ever done for one major reason. I don't remember if you were there at that meet. It was in Vegas, and they did it in alphabetical order. So I was in the 308 weight class, but my last name was W, and somebody else squatted the 1,003 before me, but he dumps it over his head. Spotters lose 2 fingers between the monolift and the plates, and the guy pretty much scalps his head because those bars were brand new squat bars. They load it back on the rack, clean up the blood and the fingers, and Louie looks at me and goes, if you can get this squat, you're a fucking maniac. Because I already had my knees wrapped. I was ready to jump up because it was the same weight, and it was almost the same rack height. It was like 16 and a half. I remember it completely. And he goes, man, after that guy just lost his fingers, the guy's like, oh, his fingers are off, and they bombed the dude out of the meet, and they put the weight back up on there, and I got to crawl underneath this thing and just watch about 3 people die handling this 1,000 pounds, and I get it. And that's when I realized, like, I had a different gear. Like, that shit didn't bother me. I was mentally so tough. And the thing of it was, when you trained at Westside, if you went to a meet was 60% of the intensity of a training day.
Easily.
Because you didn't get that kind of rest periods, and you would rather compete against somebody you didn't know than to disappoint Chuck. Well,
that and for me and for my time period, it was the bullshitting abuse or whatever you want to call it, the shit talking, right? Where it just keeps going, and you're like, nah, it's just, you're ignoring, but every night it's like, motherfucker, you get caught up, so a meet's like a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Where there was, after moving to West Belt, it was when actually Wendler was maybe a year before that, where it was, I remember when Jim and JL came in. And I had a conversation with Louie, and it's like, I want these guys in the gym because at that point in time, and in his mind, it's like, I've already created like 70 or 100 elite lifters just off people in Columbus.
Sure.
I was the first one to move to Columbus to train
migrate.
There, and that was it. But I reminded him, I was a pain in the ass for a year. You almost threw me out. Because I wasn't doing your shit, because I wasn't buying into it. And that's only because I already had 3 or 4 elites coming in. I have a degree in this shit. I'm not an idiot. I know this. A lot of this other stuff is foreign to me. I'm just now catching on to it. But once you showed me the information, and then I started to buy in, understood it, and then my total goes up 250 pounds, so I was wrong. But anyhow, and I said, now what you're doing is these guys, they're stronger than I was. I am. They're stronger than I am currently right now. They're also, educated with the same type of degree. And they've also got, to a place, higher than what I was.
Yeah, and their intensity was high.
Yes. Are you sure you want to do this? Because this is going to bring in other complications is how I explain it. This is going to bring in other complications / drama that you've really never had to deal with before.
Yep.
Because outside of myself in that 1.5 years, it's people just come here and they just do it.
This is what's crazy. So, and it's funny because it's kind of full circle, but where I got that fluctuating raw, medium gear, full gear was from Verkhoshansky. So if you go back and look on the internet, you'll find a long talk somewhere of me and Verkhoshansky on verkhoshansky.com. He actually reached out to me on the Westside Barbell website. He's like, I'm very intrigued by how you guys have utilized what we have talked about for the last 60 years. Could you write me a sample couple of weeks and show me how you guys train? Absolutely. I consider him one of the godfathers of understanding training. And he couldn't speak English, but his daughter could. So she was translating this. And so I show him this, and he goes, that's interesting. It's not how we exactly did it. We would do things in blocks. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Tell me what you mean. He goes, I know you guys use equipment now to lift. He goes, have you ever thought about doing something, no equipment, medium equipment, high equipment. And I was like, no, we've never done any of that. And he goes, that would be an amazing way to create a block of conjugate to where you will not overtrain because your intensities can't stay the same. And I was like, holy shit, this is a whole new, and I'm getting this information from someone that Louie learned from. And I didn't overstep him. He reached out to me.
Yeah.
But he was super intrigued that we were not using this kind of block tier system. And so I started to implement almost a linear periodization to conjugate. I was rotating exercises, but also adapting percentages. So what I would do was I started reading on, I want to say it was Medvedev, and they said that anything above 90% will have high neurological adaptation, but also high burnout.
Yeah.
And they saw that anything at 90% actually had the same adaptational factors as 100% over a long period of time. So if you were to do 100% for 8 weeks, you're going to get more results than doing 90% for 8 weeks. But for 2 years, 90% wins.
Yeah.
Because you recover from it. And so I'm starting to read this and I'm going, I don't need to go balls to the wall every week. I need to save it in the tank and only go balls to the walls when I'm trying to break a record. Right? So you have this training force maximum and competition force maximum. And that, I feel, is one of the most misunderstood things at conjugate. They see max effort. They think they need to go to they fail. You need to go until you're stimulated to grow. It's a completely different scenario, but it's one that was very hard to follow at Westside Barbell because we were so competitive.
Yes.
So if you beat me, I want to beat you. Now I'm doing an extra set that might not even be making me any better. It actually might be making me worse. And for what? Because I say I beat you in the gym. We should be worried about beating each other in the meet.
Yeah.
And that's where Louie, I think, would lose his mindset. He would get so worked up in how competitive we were in the gym that for a lot of us, we were already burned out by the time we got to the meet. So as I learned how to conserve my energy and do the minimum to get better, my total just kept going click, 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 click. And I didn't really get to fully understand that entire mindset until Chuck and I left. Chuck leaves first. He's mad as hell at Louie, thinking he misjudged him with something. And now I've got all the scrutiny because I have to take over the morning group.
Yeah. Well, there was kind of more to that too, where Chuck did feel like he needed to be in gear more.
Yeah.
You know, so, because even when I was still there, he would come in and run the monolift for everybody on Friday, but then on Saturday, he would squat with his
own crew.
Yep. They weren't great lifters, but
they did whatever he wanted to do.
They showed up and, you know, so it was his own crew. And so there was kind of already a little bit of that brewing to begin with.
And that had been happening for years, even before I was in the picture.
Yeah.
But what started to happen was when I sat down with Chuck, because, you know, Louie kicks me out because I'm doing these raw, medium gear, large gear, and we get into this big confrontation at the monolift right there on Wilson, and I'm like, he's like, I don't know why you're doing all this raw work. It's not going to work. I'm like, Louie, the last time I ordered my briefs, I had to get a size smaller because my legs got weaker. Like I literally lost a half an inch off of my quads. And I'm like, this is not going to make me stronger putting more shit on. And as I did that, I gained it back and had to order another size bigger brief. And I knew the first time I put the full gear on, it was like, ba-boop, right? And I remember going out to your place when it was over by the agriculture center. You remember me squatting 1,003 for 3? And it was just like, ba-boom, ba-boom. I was already learning that I was overtraining. This was a year out of Westside. So Chuck sets me down. He goes, you're the only lifter I've ever told this. You come in and train with me and do whatever you can that I'm doing, but whatever you got going on is working. You do what you want to do. So I came in and squatted every set and rep and scheme that he would do, I would follow, including the technical skill. And then I would follow him as much as I felt I needed to get better in every meet I went to. Well, the first meet on my own out of Westside, I broke the world record. And I pulled 800. And it was one of those things where I knew I was onto something. But I had to be on my own to figure it out. And for me, what I learned was I was very explosive. I was very neurological. I was very intensive, but I could burn out very easy if I didn't rotate movements fast.
Yeah.
And so for me, a weekly rotation was crucial into forcing neurological or inhibiting neurological burnout, because if I tried to do the same thing in a ramp phase, it seemed by like week 2 or 3, I was cooked.
What, for max effort stuff?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I was exactly the same way. I was faster than I was strong by far. And for me, it drove me crazy in the gym because on max effort day, and this is getting to where you're talking about the competitiveness, I'm getting smoked by people that are squatting 200 pounds less. And it took me a while to realize, you know what, just deal with it. And then I would start saying, okay, well, come fucking, you know, do the dynamic work with me on Friday.
And then kick their ass
because they couldn't, you know, they couldn't even get the weight I was using out of the fucking rack, you know. But it was there's a continuum I think everybody kind of falls on, and then you got to figure out where you fall, and then what you're going to do, you know, with max effort
and
work
I think
or
that
dynamic.
Louie, you and me are probably one of the best people to, you know, I would say in the last 20 years, they can pick people's weaknesses out and fix them. But I think once you get to that point, I think the hard part that Louie had, and even all of us have at some point, is how do you make that fit your training better? And I don't think Louie was as good at that, because he could find your weaknesses and tell you what needed to work on, but the actual work that needed to be done, sets, rep schemes, how to rotate the exercises, I feel was a little bit more up to you.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is up to you means there's a lot of mistakes along the way. Versus there's no clear-cut thing, because we're all different. And that's the hardest thing is people ask me, what's optimal this? How would you train this? The answer is, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you can recover from. I don't know your stress level. I need to know your chronological and training age. Then I might be able to turn the closet on with the light and aim at what I need to hit. But people think it's easy, like, hey, I want to train to play football. How should I lift weights? What's your weaknesses? And you can drill that into people's head 1,000 times. They don't understand. They think it's a specific goal, when in reality, it's a specific individual need.
Yes.
And that's the important thing to selecting the proper training protocol.
Exactly.
Right?
No, I agree 100%. It's with the weaknesses, the way I look at that is, first off, training age matters. Right, because a beginner's form and all it's going to suck,
and it's going to get worse as they get fatigued.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas an advanced lifter, if you watch Chuck, set after set after set, he's going to get tired, but he doesn't change form.
Yes,
that is a learned skill over many years, and most people do not just inherit that; they have to work for it.
Yes,
and so that's the biggest problem that I find, that most intermediate and beginners, they don't know where their weaknesses are. They think they can follow a generalized template. And the problem with that is it will give you generalized results, but it may not specifically be exactly what you need at that time. Therefore, you're leaving poundages on the bar that could be lifted, and you're increasing mileage in areas that probably don't need the mileage.
And you could be wasting time.
And
which
energy.
Is kind of the same thing where if you go about 4, 6, 3 weeks, whatever it's going to be, doing something that doesn't address that weakness, then you're still going to have to address it
at some point.
So now you just pushed it down the road.
And most people they're not going to directively try to fix a weakness until it becomes an injury.
Well, actually,
you
get
what I'm saying? So
I get it.
They'll avoid, and the body will adjust to it.
I had to pause only for a minute because I don't work with most people. Like I'll see a technical issue and I'll say, okay, here, this technical issue is just 100% technical.
But if we take a beginner or intermediate lifter that we don't have direct touch to, the problem with most people is that they will start to train and they will start to gravitate towards their strengths and things that they like and ignore the things that they don't like. And then until it becomes an injury, then they want to fix it when it's, I wouldn't say too late, but it's behind the 8 ball.
Big time.
Right? And now you've created this motor pattern that's incorrect. You have these muscular imbalances that are incorrect. And the farther along those imbalances go in these compound movements, the longer it takes for the deficient muscles to catch up.
Yes.
So you have to know what your weaknesses are at that particular time and put, I would say, at minimum 60% of your training energy into the areas in which need the most work, not the things you like to do.
Of course. Yeah, I 100% agree, because for the easy way I will explain it, if I'm watching somebody squat, assuming there's somebody I'm seeing a lot, right, and I see a breakdown, my immediate thought is, okay, this is a weakness. Now, is this weakness because it's an activation issue? Say it's upper back. Is this solved just by higher rep upper back work to put in, then next week, boom, it's gone? Or is this like a for real, like muscular weak point? Right?
Or is it a fatigue problem?
True.
The big thing we start to find, and why I created Wenning Warmups, is I was smart enough to realize that strength wasn't my problem, conditioning was my problem.
Yes.
So I needed to be pre-fatigued. I wanted to make myself feel like I was in a contest after I got done squatting an all-time world record, and now I have to bench. If I can do that, that was the initial thought process, was pre-fatigue. But then I learned another word as I started to train it and research it, was potentiation. So as I started to activate more triceps with the right percentages, more triceps, more lats, more rotator cuff work, etc. Let's just say the bench press to make it easy. Those muscle groups, if I potentiate them, which is a proper amount of volume, not too much, not too little, it actually enhances technique and increases performance by pre-fatiguing. And that's where it came to be. So when I did my first raw meet, I hit the 3rd highest total of all time in 308 in my first raw meet in 2013. So I was like, holy fuck, right? Like, I'm so close. Because Dan Kovacs had the all-time world record at 2202, And the highest total at that time, at any time, was Don Reinhold at 2293 or 97. Nobody had touched 2300 yet, not completely raw. And so I'm like, I can beat Dan Kovacs. I know I can. So I start to train, and I'm driving home, and my squat had shown about an 800, completely raw, bare sleeve, walked out. I hit 777, so I was close. But then after I hit that 777, I had done 565 for a triple on the bench for that training cycle. I couldn't bench 585. And I was like, what the fuck? And I started to go home and go, the average meathead goes, I just need to get stronger. It just wasn't my day. And I'm like, no, there's something else to this. I was waxed after squats. And I was 310 pounds.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I was like, this is a GPP issue. So I start digging through my stuff, and I go back to 2012. I'd spoke in Australia, and there was this PhD student that was talking about potentiation and pre-fatigue with rugby players on particular movements, and this light bulb goes off. So I call Stan, and I said, Stan, can you give me Flex Wheeler's number? I need to talk to Flex Wheeler. And he goes, yeah, no problem. So I call Flex, and I'm like, hey, Flex, where do you feel the rep range that you put the most muscle mass on? Because I knew going raw, I needed way more muscle tissue. I needed to be leaner and more fit because the gear wasn't going to hide anything. And he goes, oh, without a doubt, 25s. So I'm like, why'd you like 25s? He goes, because it forced me to not have a high enough intensity. If you can do it for 25, it's not that heavy, but the volume amount is so fucking high that it starts to really create a hell of a GPP base. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So now I'm thinking, okay, where's my 3 major weaknesses? So I find the first exercise is a primer. So it's like, if I'm going to flat bench, then I'm going to use flat bench dumbbells. Not incline, not decline, flat. But if I'm going to decline or incline that day, I'll warm up the exact angle. But it's not that heavy. Now, I want everybody to understand, this next meet, I benched 606 like an empty fucking bar, and I never used more than 40-pound dumbbells. So when people ask me all the time, I'm sure it's in the questions, when do you up the Wenning Warmup? It's not about that. It's about consistent volume over a year. It's not about, oh, well, I use 70s now. That may or may not make your bench go up.
For most, it's probably going to make it drop.
The Wenning Warmup is designed as a primer.
Yes.
So I prime the movement, and then I select 2 weaknesses that I think are the worst. So for me, watching the video, I can't bench that 585 or 587 or whatever it is. I get right here, and it's just like a sticking point. So I'm like, I need more triceps. My form was perfect. The pause was perfect. I don't need anything on that. So triceps was another muscle group I knew that needed 4 sets of 25. Then I watched my lats. And what I noticed was, because I lock in so tight on the squat, my upper back was tired, so I was having a hard time keeping my shoulder blades pinched to bench correctly. And yes, you should pinch your shoulder blades and hold them to bench press.
Yes, I will second
Jesus fuck. So I don't want to answer that fucking question again. So especially, okay, so let's not go crazy. So I start to do this, and I start noticing that not only am I putting on quality tissue, my technical mastery is rising without doing any technical work. And I'm starting to gain all this muscle tissue and GPP where I cannot be fatigued. So I'm like, okay, I just tried it on the bench. I didn't fuck with squats or deadlifts, no Wenning warm-ups. I wanted to take my experiment and lock it down on one lift. So I go to Raw Unity in 2014. You were there. I was wearing an Elite FTS shirt. I break the all-time world record in the squat. I do 832, beating Scott Weech's 826, which had been a record for a long time. I benched 606 like an empty fucking bar. And I'm like, holy shit. And then I tear my groin, which I took the world record total because I was down in Florida hotter than shit, and I was dehydrated, drinking Monsters. Thinking, because I didn't know all this shit at the time. So I'm dehydrated, I tear my groin. But the point is that I broke the all-time world record in the squat, and I benched 606, which was one of the highest subtotals raw ever at that time, especially at my body weight. So what I started to realize was Wenning warm-ups were the real deal. So I started to implement them on the squat and the deadlift. And then the next meet, Dan Kovacs' world record was broken. And so what I started to notice was it was a GPP problem. It wasn't a strength problem. So for all the years of dynamics, I was quick. For all the years of max effort work, I was strong and I could grind. And then for the about 9 months of GPP work with Wenning warm-ups, I couldn't be fatigued. So every lift, I was 100% fresh because I was used to training pre-fatigued and potentiating weak muscle groups.
Now, when you came into Westside, because a lot of this resonates for different reasons, just basically accidental causes, right? So when I was in the dimmers thing, before we squatted, I would always do 4 sets of 25 or 30 on the glute ham raises, 4 sets of pull down abs. hanging leg raises mostly just for distraction, and 3 or 4 sets of reverse hypers. That was pretty standard. Like everybody was kind of doing that. When
pre or post lifting?
Pre.
Okay.
And then it was super light. Now we still did those movements after the squat too.
Heavier.
But it was part, that was the real training.
See, I never knew you guys did that.
No, this was just warm up part, right? And that's, well, there wasn't a lot of things to do either.
Yeah.
So the glute ham raises were super light, just base glute ham raises, super
well, because
easy.
See, at my time when I was there with training with Chuck,
they weren't doing that.
Chuck came in and it was time to fucking squat.
Okay, so
like we squat. If you're going to squat that day, you walk in, you might stretch out a little bit, get the bar. We'd have to loosen up, under the squat bar because all of our shoulders were tight for being big benchers. But once you got warmed up under the bar, it was squat time. There was no warm up at that time.
Yeah.
So, and there was never any of that type of warm up at Westside when I was there.
I can't say everybody was doing it, but a lot of us were. I mean, I was coming from training people too, so it's like my back's jacked. I need to move, do something, and then on the bench days, it was like, pull downs, or every day Chuck was doing like 25 sets of pull downs, before training.
Yep.
So that's what was curious to me, is because that in an indirect way and not as specific, right? We were doing similar things like that as part of the warm up, because some of it could have been, I just didn't want to drag the fucking sled.
Sure.
It didn't make sense to me. Like, why am I going to do that before, unless my knees are jacked up and it's a backward sled drag or something like that?
To be honest with you, when I use a lot of sled work, and I even post me doing sled work, I usually do it 6 hours pre or post main lift. I don't ever get a lot out of it around the lifting.
Yeah.
But the problem is I was always trying to do things at an elite level. So if I had to train twice a day, I would. But it seemed to me that the sled away from training worked better than the sled with training.
For me, it did. I did it the day after. So like Monday was max effort day. The sled work was, I worked as a trainer.
Yeah.
So the sled work was upper body sled work. It was 4 times a week. Again, away.
Yeah.
Because to me, it didn't make sense. The heavy sled work made no sense at all.
No.
It just like, why do I need to do this and then have to recover from this?
Now, I think the only way I would do that is if I was limited equipment, I would use the sled just for the sake of possibly some sacral and lumbar traction after squats if I didn't have a GHR or a belt squat or a reverse hyper.
Yeah.
That might be something, because a sled you can use for a lot of things. So I don't want to tell people don't do sledding, because I think it is a great exercise that does have some traction benefits if you're a very limited traction type. We have all this stuff in our gyms.
Yeah.
But, that could be an option. But in my opinion, if you're pushing for the best, I would put sled work away from training.
Yeah. I would 100% agree with that. Unless it's what you're talking about. If they don't have anything else.
Yeah. Just do what you can.
You gotta build through what you can there. When you were there on West Belt, were you guys, before you started doing this, was gear being implemented much at all? Full gear. Suit, straps up, knee wraps. It
was becoming very, very common because of Big Iron.
Yeah.
So we would go there, and Rick Hussey would have all these great lifters, and they were hitting these big numbers at lighter weight classes, and Louie's feeling pressure because Louie was the strongest gym in the world.
Yeah.
But then Hussey had a couple of classes that we couldn't touch, and that's why he went and outsourced Phil Harrington and brought him in, which was a completely bad idea for all kinds of reasons that we don't need to go into. But the big thing is that we started to implement gear more for that pressure. And I started to notice we were using gear too much. We almost needed to go back to what you guys were doing.
So that's what I was thinking. It would definitely, because now that's all, gear's all circa max. To be honest.
It is.
It's all, so that.
And it's high neurological drainage. The thing of it is, if you can squat, say, 750 with no gear, but you can squat 1100 and all that shit, your CNS is squatting 1100.
Yes.
And so even though people can go, well, that's not real.
Yeah.
Put that shit on your back. It's fucking real.
Oh, yeah. And the recovery demands are really real.
I'll tell you this. When I squatted the 1197.6 world record in 2011, when I picked that up, that was one of the few squats I picked up and I felt my femurs actually bow. And that's when you know shit's about to get real.
Mm-hmm.
And Ed Cohen wrapped my knees, and I remember telling him to back it off 50% because he was wrapping them like old IPF style days. I'm like, dude, I can't wear my knees wraps that tight because I need to feel that weight and stay in balance. What people don't realize is when you lift 4.5 times body weight or whatever the fuck that was at that time, what you start realizing is that coordination and balance is more important than power, because that weight cannot get a quarter of an inch out of groove, or you're not getting it no matter how strong you are. And that's what's really important with not only raw lifting, but geared lifting, and why in my opinion, the small muscles and the technical proficiency become what separates the average strong guy from the elite. It's the small things. It's the little muscles doing everything right. Because let's face it, you and I in our prime, if we were to hook an electrical stimulation system to our fucking quadricep, we probably weren't much different. But what was different? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And the point is the small shit. Could I lock my obliques in better? Could I does my spine not hurt when I pick up a weight because everything's balanced? Is my technique good? You know, and that's the hardest part is people still want to argue about technical proficiency, and I've never had a back injury. And they're like, well, what about, you know, this anterior pelvic tilt? Isn't that bad? Yeah, I'd be in a fucking wheelchair if it was bad. And so you have all this neutral shit. I'm like, what you guys don't understand, and I'm not being a dick about it, but what you guys don't understand is when you go under extreme load, you start anteriorly rotated, you can't hold that. So I stick my ass out as far as I can and arch. But as soon as that 1200 goes on my back, it puts me where it wants to be. I don't try to let it, but with the anterior pelvic tilt, it forces the body to start the process with the hips and the knees drawing out. You're scissoring the squat. So people look at a squat and they think up, down. It's lateral pressure, right? You're pushing, whether it's raw or equipped, it doesn't matter. And I should have been the one to prove that, having the raw world record and the equipped world record, is that it's all about maintaining all the other muscle groups in play versus letting the quadricep dominate. Once the quadricep dominates, it's a domino effect of disaster. You know, now unless you're weirdly built, where you have very, very short femurs or something, and you can let that shin come forward, in my opinion, it doesn't load the muscles as well, and it will lead to more injuries and less career life. And that's why Olympic lifters don't really last more than one gold medal. They let their knees go 20 inches over their toes, and now they're destroying everything.
I find it interesting that you, with your back injury comment, because when I'm not going to say I didn't strain a back. I mean, we'd all be lying if we didn't say we didn't strain a back. But I have no back problems either.
I don't
right?
either.
So if it was heavy squats create back problems, they're lying. Box squat create back they're lying, because I've been doing this for how fucking long?
Yeah.
When I retired, if you want to even call it that, right? Is it to Louie, it's you quit, you know, retire, whatever you want to call it. When I stopped powerlifting, I was thinking, oh, thank God I got out of this and just my upper body's fucked up. Now my hips came later, right? So now, was that a cumulative effect? Yes, of course. Genetics, training, they're all cumulative effects. Yes, definitely. But I'm like, well, yeah, I'm like, I got out of this thing and I didn't have one knee problem. I didn't have one back problem. You know, now my shoulders and pecs are fucked. But, you know, that started before I got to Westside.
Well, here's my thought process, and why I feel it's so difficult for me to explain this to people is my biggest thing that I look for in someone to tell me what to do is how long they were able to stay in the game and the mileage that occurred while they were doing it. So if somebody figured out how to get to an elite level with low mileage, I want everything that person knows. Because you can make anybody strong with a stupid ass workout if they have great genetics. But if they can last a whole decade with minimal or no injuries, this guy knows something. And he knows not only how to throttle up, he knows how to throttle down. And that's really what a real champion, in my opinion, does. It's not the world records. World records change. But in reality, like when I see technical skill, I could watch somebody squat 315 with perfect form, and I'm more impressed if somebody squats 500 with shit form. Period. To me, that 500 guy could be squatting 700 if he did it right. But he's impatient and he doesn't have a long-term thought process. And this kid squatting 315 with perfect form, he's got the right mentality to get really good. Because if you look at, like, why were the Soviets so much better than us in the 60s and 70s in Olympic lifting? It's because by the time they were at lifting age, their form was already impeccable, and all they had to do was load the bar. Because they were teaching them with dowel rods and they were perfecting form. But what do we do here? We think, well, let's just get strong. And then you put all this other stuff that becomes ultra important on the back burner. And then by the time you get strong-ish, now you got to go back and clean up all that mess because you were too impatient.
Well, even in powerlifting today, the majority of the people don't put enough emphasis on their technique. They just don't.
No.
You know, I mean, you can see it. You know, I hate to use Instagram videos as an example because it's one rep out of maybe 100 in that day.
Absolutely.
But, and it's usually it's the top one. So I don't want to judge based upon their top one. Maybe, I doubt it, but maybe all the other ones beforehand were really, really good.
Probably not.
That's what I'm saying. Probably not. But they're leaving so much weight off their total because even just one correction that holds on a squat can have 50 pounds.
Well, and I think that's where I hit the tail end. You had the best generation of strength training, and I'll tell you why, is because you didn't compare yourself in other videos until PLUSA came out with your weight class once a year.
Yes.
And that was a word in a paper. Now you're comparing yourself to all of these other people on Instagram and Facebook and all these different things. And what it does is it wants to catapult people into this stardom strength level too fast. They don't earn the right to be there, and then they can't stay there. And to me, that's why I always call it the 3 pillars that you need. Education is important because not because of what you learn in school. I'm not saying that I don't use a ton of what I learn in my master's in biomechanics or undergrad, but it did teach me to open up books and read.
Yes,
and it did teach me to have a different mindset.
Yes.
Number 2, I got to a high level of strength training, and I broke some of not only all-time world records, but my own PRs, and far beyond what I ever thought I was capable of. And number 3, I stayed there for a very long time. That meant that all 3 of those things is what I call like the stool, right? Like if you got 3 posts on a stool, it'll stand.
Yeah.
You take one of those away, it falls.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, if you don't have those 3 stools, if you're truly passionate like you and I are, you're going to go put the time in the education. You're going to try to stay in it long term because, again, we go back to I am more impressed with somebody who can stay around forever and hit big numbers and then stay healthy. Those are the 3 things that, in my opinion, really set you, and some of that's genetic too, but it's smarts. It's being patient. It's doing things correctly. It's probably fixing your weaknesses. I've never seen a person with a perfect technical form on a squat, bench, or deadlift that had any extravagant weaknesses. They're usually pretty balanced, right? Lats to pec ratio, tricep ratio, all of it's great because it has to be at those numbers. You can't do something perfect with improper muscle imbalances.
Yeah, I mean, that's the glaring obvious thing, though, because if you watch videos of people at the highest level, in any federation for that matter, there's some outliers, but most of them, their technique is really, really good. And then I don't know why people don't look at you like they don't look there, but I wrote a thing a long time ago on how to rank your powerlifting coach, and it's like the first one is what's the education level? You know, where is it? It's just separate. Like, is there a degree? And if there, what are the certifications? You know, what's the CECs or whatever you want to say, Pat? Where do they rank on a scale of 1 to 5? You know, the second one is what have they done themselves? You know, and that matters. You know, and
well, it matters greatly because, and the thing of it is, if you can't push, and it doesn't have to mean you ever had to get to our level, but if you can't break your own personal roadblocks and barriers, how in the living fuck can you fix anybody else?
Exactly.
You can't. And I don't care if that means going from 275 to 300 on bench or 400 to 500. I don't care what that number is, but you have to hit a wall and figure out how to go around the wall. And if you don't know how to do that, you can't help other people.
Yeah, and it's on the further end, though, if that person that's looking for help is trying to get to that world level, national level, and they're all in, if you've never been all in on this shit, you can't relate to them.
No.
And they're going to know it.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, you know, because it's a different level. I mean, it's everything else goes on the back. You came to Westside broke as fuck, you know. JL came living in a car. You know, and I mean, that's just one example, but it's that all-in mentality for a long period of time. That's completely different coaching and understanding than somebody that's not. Then the other thing I have in there is, can you make people, you know, there's a little caveat here, because if you're an all-time world record holder, the question is, can you make people better than you were, right? Where, yes, I mean, if you're there, that becomes a bigger challenge, right? But you can get them to the same platform, you know, to the nationals, worlds, whatever.
And the hardest part to find, I think, to find in that balance of all that is you might have the capacity to get somebody better than you, but if you get them better than you with beating them to pieces, and when I run into them 10 years later, they can't walk, I did not do my job. And that's the hardest part to balance is sometimes the guys that want to be world class, they don't know when to recover. And then some of the guys that want to be world class don't know what it takes to be all in. So what you start to find is that, like that Ric Flair quote I posted, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago, it's like, my biggest problem is I think everybody has the same determination I do. And what you realize is everybody wants to do what you do, but they don't realize what that entails.
No, and sometimes that being all in, though, and this is what I run into with the higher level lifters. They'll tell me they're all in until I say, you need a break. You know, you need to, you know, cycle things down. You need to go through more of a bodybuilding type phase. You need to get the bar off your back for a little while. Oh, I can't do that. Well, wait a minute. Or I thought you were all in.
Or even a bigger problem is they can't separate themselves from people outside the gym that don't have their goals in mind. I.e., how many lifters did we have at Westside Barbell that because they got involved with certain girls or certain situations, it completely wrecked their entire career?
So were they really all in?
Hell no, they weren't.
You see what I'm saying?
They were all in for an hour and a half.
Exactly.
They weren't all in. And when you go all in, it's a 24-hour day job.
It is. It's completely different.
And I think that's what you and I share a lot of is we didn't have the best genetics in the groups that we were in, but we had the most determination. We were willing to give up the most to be the best. That's the difference. Is I couldn't have been this good and had a 12-hour construction job like Louie did when he was healthy and all these other people. I had to sacrifice everything to be at those numbers that I want to be. And that's what puts me in the stance that I am with, we talked about answering questions and people getting upset about that kind of stuff. Think of the things that I sacrificed to know what I know. Show me that you want to put skin in the game, because I, as a broke high school kid, was putting $20 that I didn't have in my gas tank to drive 3 hours away to squat with you guys. That shows me you want to learn.
Well, and as we were talking, you didn't get a whole hell of a lot of attention when you came in either.
It was like this, right? And you're going to learn by watching until you show us that you're loyal enough and that you are worth our time.
I mean, Louie had a lot of people, that come in as visitors. So as they come in, you kind of watch and you have to ask a question. I mean, you'll be somewhat nice, but at the same time, I got to get back to work by 11:30 to train people and all this other stuff. And it's like, it's just like
you have to manage. You have to manage your energy and your time.
Are they going to fucking listen?
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to spend the time, are they going to listen? That's the first thing. And are they going to apply it? And are they even serious? Or are they just here because they saw the VHS tape?
And that's over the last 20 years, and you've done this longer than me with this stuff, is what you find is not all the time, but I would say at least half the time, people that are willing to ask you a question and they are not willing to do their own research and treat you like their own personal librarian. When I have over 300 videos on my YouTube channel that if they watched all of them, their question would already be answered. So why are you mad at me that I won't take the time to answer your question when I've already put that information out? Because it shows me you don't have the work ethic. Like, I learned this because I went and opened up a fucking book and I read it and then I experimented with it for 20 years.
Yes.
But you're mad that I don't want to ask a question. And what I find interesting is behind a paywall, like my Patreon channel, is that those people are ultra respectful of my time. They also utilize everything that I show them. And so that, to me, just creates a barrier. It's not about that. It's not even about the money. It's about having the respect that you're going to use what I show you.
Yes. And this is what we were talking about earlier, because it's a lot of the questions were kind of about the paywall and all this other kind of stuff. And people will say, well, Dave gives all this information for free. What they don't understand is it's not free to produce, and it's not free on my time. I work 80, 100-hour weeks and have for 24 years, and it's the products that people buy that create the revenue to be able to pay for the content team, which if people have been listening to me in the last 2.5 years, whatever it is, we lose money through our content team, and the sales aren't covering, what I'm saying? Don't cover that. So is it marketing? Yes, it's marketing, but I learned, during COVID that doesn't help. It doesn't help when things are tight. Now, core group, yes, that helps. That's what's kept me in business. But to grow the business, that's why we're looking for sponsors for the podcast and things that we're doing there, because it's the margins on content are vast. They're big, but it's not really scalable. Margins of product it's just a different style of business. So people will ask, well, what do you think about these guys, that don't answer questions and all this other stuff? And I'll look and I'll say, well, there's YouTube videos. Most of the people that are in the space of monetizing their content have a lot of free content out there. You see, so they're not they don't have profit from other stuff to be able to put in there. And so it's two different.
Well, and I think the other thing is, you think about it in this perspective, some people, and not that they know any more or less than me, their job primarily isn't a coach. I'm a coach.
Exactly. I am not a coach.
So I go to all of these contracts with Riker Automotive and train all the diesel mechanics and all these fire departments. And the thing of it is that's how I make my money, by what I know. Now I do make money with what I sell as well, but it's just hard because they don't realize the expense that it costs to put out 2 free videos a week. You know, and all of the media team that it takes to do that, and all the media team it takes when you click on the website, everything works. Like that costs money. And what I try to tell people is like, you know, if you can't pay $5 a month to ask me a question, you sure as fuck don't have any of my manuals, and you're probably not supporting my business in one way, shape, or form. And it's just interesting to create the negative energy because you feel like you're being singled out, that your question's not important. Everybody's question is important to me, but the answer is it important to you? Yes. And if you have skin in the game, now I know it's important to you.
Yes, and it's just, I mean, when it comes down to it, it's different marketing, because when I was looking through some of these things here, there was a little debate about, well, Matt had to pay for his education. I'm like, well, I had to pay for my education. So I'm on the other side, like I had to pay for my education too, not to mention, you know, the medical bills I had to incur from things going wrong, or the legal bills I've had to incur. You know, I got millions of dollars into my education. So there's what people I don't think understand is, as you just said, the majority of your revenue is coming from coaching. You know, the majority of our revenue is coming from the product sales. Now, and so
I'd say 65% of what I make comes from coaching, and 45% comes from what I make on the website. So for me to give out free information like I do on YouTube twice a week with pretty in-depth topics, I feel is a way to give back, but it creates business for me, no question about it. But it's a way that I give back without having to answer everybody's individual question. Because you know, once you get so big, you don't want to ignore anybody, but you can't help it. You know, when I leave here, I got to go work at Riker for 3 hours tonight when I get done with this. So it's not like me and you are just sitting around on the computer answering people's emails constantly. We have to keep everything rolling, and people don't see behind the scenes. They don't see how much, you know, you're putting 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. I'm doing 70 hours a week. We're all busting our ass. And then to give all this free content out like you do, which I'm very humble as you put out so much cool stuff. It's one of those things where, you know, you almost like, does anybody respect it?
Well, the other difference too is how with the stuff that we put out, how deep can we go? Like I can't go deep on anybody really on that individual specific level, you know, because I don't offer those services to be able to do that.
And if they're not standing in front of you, how would you know?
You don't.
And that's the other problem is I don't know how many questions we get where you absolutely know they don't understand the variables. They don't understand. You just told me you want to be a better football player, but you didn't tell me how fast you are, how tall you are, how much you currently squat, how long you've been training, who are your coaches, do you have any previous or existing injuries, surgeries, what's your blood work look like, all of these things. You know, if somebody sent me an email like that and put that much time into it and gave me all those lists, I'd be more apt to answer it.
Well, yeah, and as we were looking through the questions here, you know, the bunch of them I highlighted was kind of the distinction between block and conjugate. You know, they think that all these things are completely separate and they can't be integrated.
Which I've done.
Yeah, where you look through all that, and the first question that pops through my mind is, this is very hard to answer because I don't know what context they're coming from. So now if they actually knew block, Ursuline, Boompa, whatever. I mean, there's variances amongst them, you know, and Verkhoshansky as well. It's all the same framework per se.
It's the same. It's just like religion. It's the same methodology.
Same methodology. Then conjugate is its own methodology, right? And then linear is kind of like its own.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason that I've really gravitated towards conjugate had nothing to do with Westside, nothing to do with Louie, although that was the catalyst. What it was is it was the most scientifically understood way to train I've ever seen. They understood every way to hit weights in muscle groups in order for them to stimulate growth, and they understand how to do it in a strategic way. If you look at all these other systems, they have fault lines. They take something away to bring something else in. They don't bring everything else up in a linear fashion with everything being addressed and accounted for. That's why conjugate is so powerful. But the reason that it's so unused and misunderstood, it's a thinking man's way to train. And that means you have to be a student of the game for a long time to truly understand the ins and outs of it, which can never be, we couldn't do it in a 25-hour
So that's where a lot of these questions become very difficult and complex to answer is they don't have an understanding of what this philosophy of block is. They don't have an understanding of what they know the understanding of maybe linear, that's pretty easy. And they don't have the understanding of conjugate. Then they're asking a question about combining two things that we can break into pieces to discuss separately in an intertwined way. And without the understanding of taking the time. My point is they're not taking the time.
I think the biggest thing, if I can give it to the listeners on how to decide what you do for conjugate, is we don't just sit down and write a 15-week cycle. We write a 15-week cycle. We write a 15-week idea.
Yes.
And then what I do is I use some linear periodization in this conjugate system. So what I'll do is say when I squatted the 865.5 all-time world record and just sleeves in a belt, what I did was I squatted 700 for 5. Then I took that video and I watched it, seeing what I was doing right, what I was doing wrong, and hopefully picking up the muscle groups that I felt needed that 1% more kick in the ass. So the next 2 weeks to 3 weeks, I trained to attack those particular areas in which I feel were huge issues. So I'll give you an example. I squat 700 for 5. I noticed that my upper back is starting to kind of kink just a half an inch, because we're talking big numbers and I don't have form break. So I see this. So I'm like, I need safety bar, because safety bar is going to force me to arch in. So I put safety bar in a week, and then I noticed that I'm not keeping my abs tight. Then I put camber bar in the next week. The week after that, I squat 740 for a triple, and it's fixed. Now I'm watching that lift. Okay, I felt like my foot pressure was off. More hamstring work, more glute work, more focus when I'm speed squatting. Slow down the eccentric, match it to the compound movement of which that speed is. So I'm timing the squat, saying, okay, it took me 4.3 seconds to go down. Now every speed squat is 4.3 seconds down. It's as fast as I can go up, but it's 4.3 seconds down. So I'm matching my body's time limit. Now my foot pressure's fixed. Now I hit 775 for a double. Go to the meet, boom, hit a world record.
So to me, that's the beauty of conjugate, is you can pivot and adapt like that.
Adaptability.
And all those things matter. That timing, the time under tension, however you want to call it. I tell a story. I had somebody out here and we were talking about time under tension. They're not a power lifter, and they were talking about a squat. And they were saying it was like 4.5 seconds. I'm like, dude, no, it's not. Like, it's way more than that. And let me show you a video, and it's, hell, it may have been you. It could have been anybody in the meet. I'm like, I want you to watch something. As soon as they grab the bar and they place one foot and the second foot, watch. Everything's, isometrically, isotonically contracted.
You're contracting.
It's tension. And it's a boatload. I said, now start count. Turn the timer on. It was like 15 seconds or something like that.
Well, that's the thing is, so I would calculate how much time it took. I would also calculate energy level. So when I'd get done squatting, I'd say, did you feel like you recovered from that squat cycle in 2 days? If the answer is yes, the GPP is perfect. If the answer is no, I need to add in some more mini workouts in order to enhance that GPP. If I'm 15 or 20 weeks out, remember that this is another big golden nugget. If you're 4 weeks out from a meet, there's no fixing anything.
Exactly.
You're fucked.
It's peaking at that point.
It's peaking. It's what you have at that point. But if you're 20 weeks out, you can still polish. So I had a polishing phase where everything would adapt. And then every time I hit a back squat with a straight bar, no chains, no weights, that was my detailer. So that was my assessing tool. So I'd use that. Remember, we talked 700 for 5, find the weaknesses. Then the 765 or 50 for triple was another assessment tool. And then in between those blocks were areas in which how to fix the areas I thought were the deficiencies. And then it would just ramp me up to the point I'd hit a world record. And so that's the thing, is the adaptability and understanding of what you need at what time is really the mastery of periodization. You could have all these different kinds of blocks and train any kind of way you want, but if it's not matching your needs at that time, you're wasting your time.
That's how I think that's where I understand that blocks will put those specific attributes in a certain block, but who gives a shit if, you know what I'm saying? If it happens when you don't need it.
Right.
That never made sense to me. Now, outside of powerlifting, football.
I think
things change. I get that, but now that block's oriented around, time. How often can they train? Is it in season? Is it off season? Do they start? Do they not start? But still, again, where are their weaknesses?
Well, and then the weaknesses is the key point. The next key point is accommodation. So now if you've seen that block before and your body's been through that stimulus, it's no longer as powerful. So now you're playing this game of my body already understands the question. I need a new question because now I have the answer too easy. It's physically.
Yeah.
So what you start realizing is you have to have different questions for your body to answer on these different blocks, and they have to look different. I'd say by 10% every year. 10% something needs to waver because the body already understands the question. That becomes the thinking man's real problem, is how do I keep my body getting better, reducing mileage, but also keep it guessing so that the stimulation I'm doing is actually doing something. Because if you do the same block system, let's say it's a 12-week program, you get my power building manual or some of the manuals you've written, and you run that power building manual from front to back 3 times in a row, by the second time you do it halfway through, it's not going to do anything. The body already understands the answer to that question. That's why blocking works well if the block is developed for what you need at that time. Just because you want more muscle mass doesn't mean that you don't need more neurological stimulation, i.e. speed work, or you don't need more technical work. Those are blocks of different types of training that should be specified depending on what you need at this time. And that can be very difficult to understand once your form is perfected, once your GPP is really high, and once you're very explosive. When you have all those 3 things lined up now, it's a real card game because you could be right, you could be wrong. And the problem is when you're starting off, the reason we get so confused with training is when you are first getting strong, everything's black and white.
Yes.
Right? You either train or you don't train. You either get better or you don't get better. But as you get elite, that gray area becomes smaller and smaller to the point that you could fuck it up way easy one way or the other. Versus when you're weak, you just train.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets confusing because people are like, well, I don't know. Do I need to train like Matt? I only bench 250. Yeah, because I focus on weaknesses and I'm training with technical mastery and I have all these different things lined up. Now, if you train with a straight bar to straight bench all the time, initially you will get stronger faster, but you're also going to create a ton of mileage.
Yes.
And then you're going to start having shoulder issues, wrist issues, pec issues because you didn't address these weak points and you didn't have a rotation of stimulus, which is increasing mileage. There's actually a paper I have on at home. I don't have it cited, but they talk a lot about how specific motor patterns done too often actually make everything go backwards. And that's pretty interesting because that also fortifies the way we train.
Yeah.
Right? If you
or practice, because I mean, I immediately went to like different drills for soccer, football, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's how often, because here's an interesting thing there is if you've played other sports, and if I'm helping people with their training, I always go to this.
Yep.
If you play other sports, did you do drills just for technical aspects that weren't game playing, just the drills? And like, oh yeah, all the time. Now, did you do segmented drills?
Yeah.
Like you really sucked at this drill, so they just took a part of that, then you just worked that part. Oh yeah, like, oh, interesting, isn't it?
Well, and the problem is what's the transfer? Because if you have these drills per se and they're not new and you get, are you mastering the drill or is it transferring to ability?
Yes.
That's the other problem that you have. And so all of those things need to be wavered in and factored. And then everybody's a little different. So that becomes a very difficult equation. And nobody wants to hear that. They think the training's easy. But in reality, once you know more, you realize what you really don't know.
Yeah. But in powerlifting, they don't look at those lifts as
assessment tools.
As assessment tools.
It's how much.
Yes.
It's not how good.
Where that is that football player's game.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, how are you breaking down that lift? You know, it's, you know, board presses are stupid. Well, isn't that just segmenting of certain part? Let's forget about the strength component.
Right.
Isn't it just segmenting a part of the technique that you might be screwing up?
And I find it hilarious that most people refute and want to argue about shit they're not good at. Right? So if I go, camber bar doesn't help my squat at all. Oh, why? Because you suck at it?
Yeah.
But you know as well as I do, I would rather take an athlete. If they're coming in, let's just take athlete A, athlete B. If I take athlete A and he is good at every style of squatting, camber bar, bands, chains, boxes, narrow, wide, I have more of a capacity to get this guy better, i.e., remember like the 3-sport rule that they use like Ohio State? They play track, basketball, and football, and then when they get to college, they play football. That is a better athlete because he has a better base versus this one guy is really good at a straight bar, but everything else I put him in, he sucks at. That dude is going to be injured fast, and his career is going to be short. So it works the same way. You need a humongous base to build a tall pyramid. And that means you need a lot of different variation, not only for mileage, but also for long-term lack of burnout.
So with all this that we've been talking about, now you're dealing with these fire departments. So you're dealing with lower end on the strength scale. I mean, what they bench, squat.
Yeah.
I say this hesitantly. It doesn't really matter compared to what their skill set is.
What matters on them of being strong is increasing ligament, tendon, and bone density so they can withstand impact.
Yeah.
Because what you don't get is on a fire truck, when you step down off the last step, it's a 20-inch step with 60 pounds of gear on.
Okay.
So what's the force reaction on the ground on that? 450 pounds if a guy weighs 200?
Yeah.
So my point is we got to get them that strong to withstand the common forces that they deal with. That's why you get them strong. It's not about going, oh, all my firemen can deadlift 500. I don't give a shit about that.
Yeah.
All of my firemen lower their injury rates, and now they can do their job better. That's what matters. And sometimes, a lot of times, because they're weak, getting them stronger is the key to that. But there is a double-edged sword, because traditional strength training is not going to help as much as doing something smart. By meaning, if you're working with these tactical populations, one, you got to know where their structural weaknesses are. Two, you have to look at their stress levels and what they can handle, because you got to remember, these guys are running on people that are burning in buildings. They're smashed in cars. They're dealing with PTSD stuff sometimes. So that can change this intensity level of the gym. And three, traction versus compression. Everything they do is compressive based. So most of the exercises that I have them do is traction based. So they do a lot of belt squatting, a lot of GHRs, a lot of reverse hypers, a lot of lat pull downs, because it's creating space and because everything they do is compressive. And that is a huge factor to training tactical, whether it be military or fire, because of those particular issues of everything's high impact to them. And so that's where you have that big problem. And then the next thing that the fire service really needs updated on is their nutrition's terrible. They eat like shit. And we all know you can't burn off a bad diet. So if you can lower their incidence of cancers and heart attacks, what they start saying is, well, these are the major killers of firemen. But what they don't tell you is it's not job specific. It's two reasons. They eat like shit and they sleep like shit. And on their off days, when they're supposed to have 48 hours of rest, they're doing 48 hours of construction work. So you tell me where they're getting a recovery. They're getting a recovery if by chance they don't get any runs at the firehouse. But on their off days, they're busting their ass on a construction job. And so why are they getting sick and tired and all these other problems? And so we try to go in there with a holistic approach and fix their sleep and fix their imbalances and then get them stronger. And I have some rules on that. Like, we try to get everybody to double overhand deadlift 405 because they don't have straps and they don't ever get to really do this a whole lot with their tools. So I'm like, if you don't have the hands, it doesn't matter. And I like the symmetry on the spine. So if I'm pulling double overhand, I don't have that that twist, which over time, as you know, causes a lot of fucking problems.
Yeah.
Well, here's the other issue. A fireman comes in, let's say at 22. He has to be on duty till 52. And he has to be able to do the same fucking thing that he could do at 22 at 52. And powerlifting, fucking retire. When shit starts getting beat up like we did, you just stop.
Yeah.
They can't stop because their retirement and the way they're built, they got to last 30 years. That changes the scenario as well. Much more different than when I was working with Ranger Regiment and Special Ops guys. Most of those guys never make it to 33, 34, and then they opt out of something else because they can't do it anymore. So the training protocol, if somebody only has to last till 33, 34, is much different than somebody has to last till, say, 55. Those are becoming the major factors on what you utilize and what you prescribe and how you train.
Then how do you get them to buy in? Because I understand the reason for the construction work. They don't make shit. I mean,
well, they didn't used to make shit. They make about $100,000 a year now.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's, and I'm not being a dick to my firemen. They all love me, but they want that new truck every year. They end up marrying people that are stay-at-home moms, and then they have 5 kids.
Yeah.
That's not.
Yeah.
If you lived like a normal person, $100,000 a year, you can do pretty well. But a lot of it's just we get sucked into wanting more, and then all of a sudden we're working 70, 80 hours a week. And so that's what we try to help with. I'm like, guys, you need to build in this recovery because you're not going to be able to enjoy your retirement. That's how you get them to buy in.
Okay.
This is what's going to happen at 55 when you got all this money saved back and you finally can go do whatever you want to do, and now you can't do anything. Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, dude. So like these guys lifting 400-pound patients and taking them into the hospital and doing all this stuff, you have to give back to your body or that job will take from you more than it gives. And who wants to be 55 with $2 million in the bank and you can't do anything with it because your knees are beat up and your back screwed up? And that's the problem is many fire departments hire in guys that are average capacity and then expect them to be the same capacity in 30 years with no physical training. It's not going to happen. I mean, If you and I didn't train, I'm 43 this year. I think you're
54.
54.
Yeah.
If we didn't keep working out,
I'd be fucking a wreck. I'm already kind of a wreck. I'd be a total wreck.
But now imagine your job is lifting heavy patients all day and going and taking runs and taking people to the hospital, and you're lifting them out of weird positions because they fell in the tub or between the sink and the shitter. You get my point?
Yes.
So the mileage on that, because it's awkward, is so high that everything that we have to do in the gym is low mileage, high benefit, high restoration. And that's the same thing with special ops guys. Is I know that I saw a question on there that did he actually train special ops? Well, I was an advisor for 3 years for 3rd Battalion Rangers at Fort Benning. SEAL Team 3 is on Patreon doing the workouts there. And I wrote everything for Israeli Special Forces back in the day, like 20 and 30 week cycles for them to train. So I have some experience with that. But the point is the thought process is the same. How do we get to this higher level with reducing mileage and fixing and correcting imbalances and postural weaknesses? If you have that mentality, you're going to do a better job than they've ever seen. You don't have to have everything. And that's the problem, is no matter what you do, no matter what you know, no matter how much time and effort you put in, you will never make a perfect training cycle. You can't. You just can't. It's too many variables. And the more you start realizing, the higher education you get, the more you start realizing you don't know shit.
Exactly.
Like if you want to know that you don't know shit, go to the SWIS conference and sit into all these different neurological guys and hormonal guys and go, oh my God, I didn't understand any of this. And it's back to square one again.
Yes.
And that's the thing, is I think the only way we would ever be able to make a perfect training cycle is if we stayed in our prime. Let's say me and you stayed at 29 years old for 50 years.
Yeah.
We would learn.
Yeah.
But you're never there only one time.
Yes.
And that's the problem.
Because you're not going to repeat it, because.
No. So the training cycle can't be the same if you come to me at 22 and want to be strong versus if you come to me at 12.
Exactly.
It can't.
Yes.
It can't be the same if you come to me at 32 instead of 22. So all of these factors are chronological and also, genetic as far as how you're built. I mean, you can train your ass off. There's only going to be a handful of guys every fucking generation that can deadlift 900. I don't give a shit who you are or how hard you train. I mean, you and I busted our ass to pull 8 and we were never going to see 9.
Yeah.
Mostly because we're 6'2".
Yes.
But the point, you get our point.
No, there's your genetic potential, right? And who determines what that is? You know what I'm saying? So
that shouldn't be a limiting factor.
It shouldn't. I don't think it should be, but it is.
But it is. And I don't think anybody ever has all of the factors together long enough to really even see their genetic potential anyway.
That, exactly.
So be smarter and get as good as you can, but know that there is a limit to how much your body will adapt.
Yes.
And that's the issue, and you have to play around with that. And I think the closer you get to your adaptive ceiling limit, the more variability and the more dead arrow you need to be on what you're doing. And the more you start to not understand things, is the shorter your career. And that's why that 3-peg stool is so important, because lasting a long time starts to get you to understand those variables.
And the other thing with increasing the education as well is, and this is outside of powerlifting, is it's going to allow you to ask better questions.
Exactly.
Right? So when Matt Brown, I had him on the podcast, and he said something that I wish everybody would listen to, because he's not a powerlifter.
Matt Brown, the fighter, or the old guy you used to train with?
The fighter.
Okay.
The fighter. And what he was saying is, he's got to learn the technical aspects, and coming through his career, it's going here, all these different places. But when it came to strength and conditioning and nutrition, he had to learn that himself. He couldn't afford to hire a coach. He couldn't afford all this. So he spent hours and hours and hours, reading and trying to figure out, testing and doing all stuff. He's not a power lifter. He's not a strength coach. He's a UFC MMA fighter, but he wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. So he put that time. That's again, are you willing to do everything to become better? Where I'll listen to other athletes who are not lifters, other athletes. No, I just do whatever the coach says. Like, so you're not like researching what the coach is saying
or learning anything
about it, so you can at least ask the coach why you can't just say, why am I doing this, coach? You gotta, why? And
I've read this. I see why you're doing this. I just want a better understanding of what your mentality is on that.
Yes.
And then it's like, oh, that makes sense. Because then you're not questioning him. You're trying to learn. There's a big difference.
Exactly.
Big difference. And that's the problem you find on the internet is you're not reading the room. because there is no room.
Yes.
And so what happens is you answer a very broad question to one of us. It starts to realize that, one, you haven't done your research. Two, you're not answering the right question because you're not giving me the right information. And so now I don't respect your question as much.
Well, sometimes they're not even asking, you know,
what they need to know,
the right question. Where, you know, and it's, to me, a little. No, I'm going to be forthright. A lot of it's just laziness, because I had to go to a fucking library and find this shit in fucking journals and books and stuff like that. To
well,
be
you
able
remember
to
how hard it was for us to dig up that shit back in the day before the internet?
Yes. I mean, like I said, I had to go to the fucking library, and that was just by mistake, because my girlfriend was there studying. I didn't want to study, you know, so I go to a little card index, strength and conditioning, and like, holy shit, look at this, you know, and you find it. Then it's like, okay, the rabbit holes, man. It's like, okay, this rabbit hole, nutrition is probably more important than I thought. International Journal of Sport and Nutrition. I'm there for hours. Now the internet, man, you just search the shit, and then all you need to do is validate, is this source good or not? Well, is it a journal? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think people make it as an excuse to say it's too diluted. And I'm like, it's not that hard to figure out this. Like, it's not, you can look at 80% of it and say, this is shit. Anybody should be able to figure that out.
And I think that's the hardest part between you and I and talking to people is, I never would have came to Louie with a question until I showed him my work ethic. You know, he saw that I was willing to drive 3 hours away, bust my ass. And I probably didn't ask a question to him. I'd say for the first year I was driving over there, I just learned by watching. And that's the thing is, like, when people truly want to learn, why aren't they showing up at here or at the gym and asking me that question? Say, no, I need to train with you a couple weeks and figure this out. I'm all about that. But the problem is they don't want to change their lifestyle. They don't want to have to bend backwards, but they expect you to do the same, which is odd. And to me, it's frustrating. But like I said, I think that can give you a little bit of inclination of why Patreon is what it is and why I do that. It's mostly for me to take the people that I feel make my time important. That's what I feel like, you know? Yeah.
Well, even with just the general stuff, that's, say they need to learn how to lose weight and they've never dieted before.
Sure.
You can just search online, and real quick, 50%, 60%, you can just wipe out, because they're quick fix cures. And you know, anybody that thinks quick fix works, you know,
anything.
That's a different issue right there. But most people realize that's probably just bullshit. So you've just weeded out half, you see what I'm saying? Half of the stuff. And then here's the other, you know, so it's, the internet's, while it's broad, it's vast, and it has tons of content. It's not as hard as people make it seem to vet the content.
If you have basic knowledge and common sense. But those are two major things that we are missing in society these days. So that becomes a huge issue, right?
Yes, exactly. But for most of the lifters, they're gonna know. You know, and even if they see something and it's intriguing or interesting, they can still search it. You know, it's still.
And that's what I like to do, is just kind of, you know, try to answer your questions by doing some research first and see if you can answer your own question. But it's weird. I'll get questions all the time on DMs or whatever. And I have said that exact same thing on my YouTube channel for absolutely free. And it's like, so now you're telling me that you're just wanting me to spoon feed this to you. That's when I get pissed, right? I mean, how long have we been writing articles and showing people how to train, and then you're just like, oh my God, when does this end?
There was a time, 2018 or something like that, where I got on this kick. I was going to answer every DM, right? So then, it became a lot. I mean, a lot. So I had a whole page of links. You know, here's a video, here's a video, here's a video, here's an article, whatever it is. And so I would just send it out. And sometimes the videos were just 3-5 minutes. And some of the people would reply back, I don't have time for that. Can you just tell me what to do? And I mean, there was that kind of stuff where it's like, you know what? I don't know about this DM shit anymore. Right? Because some people would have like legitimate concern, you know, legitimate questions that were research that I want to help.
You can always tell.
Yeah, I would definitely want to help, but they were diluted with 99% of that. And I'm still sending the videos and all the other kind of stuff. But at that point, it's like,
so in theory, imagine at that point in time you had Patreon.
Well, yeah. You know, I mean, it would have blocked that, but they wouldn't have went.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
But here's the thing. I got 500 subscribers on there now that all think my time is valuable. And it's interesting the questions I get there versus what I get on the internet. Because these guys are like, hey, I read your journal, or I read your article here, or I read your manual here. Can you explain to me what this means? So they'll show me the page off the manual that they purchased, and they read all of this theory before they even started the training. They weren't looking for the simple answer. They were buying into it. And now when I fixed it, they messaged me like 30 days later, oh, dude, I did everything you told me, and my bench went up 25 pounds. That's the motherfucker I want to help.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to help the guy. He goes, oh, thanks for the answer. Then goes back to doing the same bullshit.
And that's a lot. I mean, that's just not just us. That's that's
everybody.
A ton of people.
Yeah.
The one thing that's interesting is they try to position us against each other.
Yeah,
It's not. I mean, they'll do it.
Yeah.
They try to do it with us. They try to do it with other people. They don't realize. And I'll just tell them right now, we don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
You know, so you do it like, well, Matt said this. What do you think of this? I'm like, I don't know the context. You know, whatever
Yeah.
it's going to be.
Well, I knew we had a difference in, I saw a little bit on like Wenning Warmups and stuff, because I don't think I had never sat down and completely explained to you.
No, I didn't understand. Now I completely get it.
Because you were doing the same thing, but you just was something different. You didn't understand it. And that's the thing is like people don't realize the guys at the top, we all know each other and we're pretty friendly.
We just call it different things.
Yeah. It's
you know what I'm
different
saying?
shit,
It's things get labeled, and that is I think it's necessary, because you got to be able to position. You know what I'm saying? There's a marketing aspect to all this too. It's just different things, and then once you realize, oh, it's that thing, like what the hell is it? You know, like people are presenting this to me like this is just an increasing increase work capacity, and it basically never ends over a period of time until you get to like 800 reps. I'm like, that can't be right, you know, and so I just avoided it.
The hardest part is, I think, coming back down to the real basics of it is everybody's different. Everybody's going to respond to a different stimulus. If you know where your weaknesses are and you know how to get all of that stuff developed, then what you can start realizing is that everybody's going to have a different path at some point. And so my way and your way, it's probably somewhere in the middle.
It is.
And Brian Carroll's way is different, and everybody's different. So none of us are right, none of us are wrong. It's a gray area. But if it worked for you, then maybe it worked for you at that time, but maybe I'd be better off doing something Brian Carroll says or you say. I don't know. But my point is like that becomes the guessing game, because most of the people I've had on online coaching, we have them for about 24 to 36 weeks. I start realizing how they adapt. That's when I can make the progress.
Yes.
So usually a good coach is not going to be able to fix you for 6 months, because he's trying to figure out what you need at that time. And the more information you have, the faster that happens. But in general, it takes that long to figure out, some people can't handle the way we used to train.
Yeah. Well, the one question that is actually when I have the small group events that I have to explain the dynamic effort in waves. And the way that I explain it is I'm like, okay, look, I already know where this is going to come. I already know what the questions are going to be. You're going to say, Louie says you need to do this 3-week wave. Matt says you got to do this 3-week wave. Nate says you have to do this 3-week wave. Brandon Smitley said you need to do 3 of this. And all of them got different percentages. So the first thing I'm going to throw out there is all of them are based upon and biased upon the demographics and the population they specifically work with. So Louie's is definitely going to be different because they are all high advanced guys.
If I can have an advantage, I think there's another variable to that will make sense for people. I think Louie got an understanding of what percentages need to be for speed work, because in our era, maybe not yours, in our era, most of the max effort work was done with equipment. So the speed work was the only day you were getting raw work. Whereas when I flipped to raw, I realized real fucking fast that if I'm doing all raw max effort training, that the speed work needs to be lighter and synergistic to the max work, because now I don't have the equipment helping me lift more weight. So both days are high muscle tension. I don't have a high equipment tension, and then speed work that's high muscle tension. And that's where I think that became confusing, because I think that if you train in equipment, you need to train speed work at a higher percentage. But if you're trying to raw bench or be athletic, you need that lower percentage, higher force output. But the problem is most people have never seen an accelerometer and they don't understand bar speed. So when I showed Charles Poliquin my bar speed, I did 185, 3 chain on each side and a double red at 1.13 meters per second. And he about shit his pants. And he's like, how in the fuck can you move that fast? I said, well, I wave it, but 185 is 33%. And he goes, I've never heard somebody training that light. I said, well, I went down to that after training raw because I want that over 1 meter per second. But then I started noticing my bench went 606, 611. Like it was boom, boom. And that's the thing is I think depending on if you need more muscle mass at that time, more dynamic work at that time, that could vary.
It changes. Well, that's what I tell them is those are starting points for all those guys. So if you're working with them, it could go down, it could go up. that's what's being presented in whatever program or manual that's out there.
Yep.
And it will adjust, kind of from there, because it's all based upon, like you said, bar speed.
I think if you could make a rule of thumb, I think for most people that I have seen help that I have never met before, just questions, lighter's better.
I believe so too.
You go heavier, you're going to start tapping into that maximum effort and tempting, and then what's going to happen is it's actually going to regress your max effort day. What I want the speed work day to do is progress the max effort day. Because in reality, if I'm trying to be a lifter and be strong, the max effort day is what matters. So is the speed day helping or hurting? And in my opinion, if the percentage is too high, it's hurting.
Yes. I also see the dynamic day as technical reinforcement.
Absolutely.
Because you have more first reps. Usually after 3 reps, a higher advanced lifter can probably maintain technique for 5, maybe. Fatigue becomes a factor. But usually after 2 or 3, for most people, they check out. So this is why I hate like 2 sets of 5 for intermediate. So you get 1, 2, maybe 2 good solid technical reps.
And that's it. You're toast.
Where forget the speed aspect of dynamic work. If there's 8, 10, 15 sets of 2, look at all the technical practice that occurred.
Well, absolutely. And the other thing too is you got to remember, if you can do something under high velocity perfect, you can do something under high strain perfect.
Yes.
So if I move insanely quick with say 225 on the bench and it's perfect form, my chances of moving perfect form with 500 are high too, because it's another side of the spectrum. I have to do that 225 perfect. It's lighter, but it's so fast that small mistakes are like that. Whereas the 500 is obviously not going to move as fast as that 225. But if I can practice under high velocity, when the velocity slows, I'm better.
You brought up a good point that I think a lot of people miss, is that dynamic work still needs to be done with technical intent. Like you can't like hyperextend. You can't just try to, yes, you want to push with speed, but you don't want to like, muscle. You don't want to muscle fuck it up so it doesn't look like what that max effort
That's absolutely true. I mean, the speed work needs to look as dialed in as say 60, 70%, but it's just under high velocity.
Yes.
And that is a very high level skill. And I would say that speed work also creating, obviously a high rate of force development. One of the other things that you're hitting on is it creates a high level of technical mastery because you're hitting it at high velocity.
Yes.
And that's where it's maybe even more important than actually speed work itself.
Assuming they're maintaining that technique. Now, if their shoulders are coming off the bat, you see the stupid shit people do. That's, to me, it's like wasted effort.
Absolutely.
It's just you're not tight. Everything's not done right. But you are correct. I mean, just the level of learning, mastering a skill, it has to be done with speed. Then it has to be done with max load.
Well, think about it like shooting a target, right? If I can pull my gun and be like, pow, and hit a target like within a 3-inch diameter, how easy it to do it if I sit there for 5 seconds and just line it up and hit it? That's way easy.
Well, what if you got to do it in the middle of a war and it's storming?
Right.
Or you need to squat that 1,000 pounds after somebody else just blew all their shit off. You see what I'm saying?
I mean,
that's where that technical mastery shows itself, is in those chaotic times. It's like, no, I've been here.
So let's reinforce that. So speed work, rate of force development is high, technical mastery is high, and then the ability to do something unfamiliar is high. Now, how do you get jargoned in anything? You don't. And that's the thing, is like, and then when you and I were doing it around Louie or Chuck and they're staring at you like they want to kill you, perfection is right around the corner. And that's the thing, is like, again, I'm more impressed with people that can do things perfect than I am heavy, because most of the time when I look at stuff on Instagram that's berserker heavy, the technique is so bad, I'm just like cringing.
No, it is. It's
You
just kind of go past it real quick. One of the other things I want you to touch on, because you have a strong raw background, and I see this all the freaking time, and how I know the answer. I just want you to explain it in a way that I haven't explained it before.
Okay.
How important is the walkout on the squat for the, from first set all the way through competing? Because look at how people walk out the bar 135, and then they're fucking up the walkout at a meet.
I would say, let's start it by this way. I see people messing up the walkout in a couple of different ways. One, they're not staying tight. So now they're wasting tons of energy in those small muscle groups that end up being the major factor. Two, why do you need to walk out more than a foot? I see people step out 60 inches, like 10 feet away from the rack. And I'm like, guys, like, you're only going to fuck up this much. And if you fuck up more than that, you're probably going to hit the floor. So you just need to do a baby step. So I heavily calculated when I was in USAPL, I watched Eddie Cohen probably squat on video at least 1,000 times to watch how he would set his feet and watch how far he'd come out of the rack, because I knew he was doing everything as efficient as possible. The problem is with every lift, how you start is going to be the biggest inclination whether you make it or miss it. Because if you start with something crooked, especially when those weights get heavy, I'll give you an example. I watched Maddox just miss that 804 bench. I knew he was going to miss it right at the top. Because if you watch that handout, you guys go and watch it, you watch the handout, he hiccups. As soon as he hiccups, all of those stabilizer muscles are trashed with 804.
I saw the same thing.
And I don't know if you guys know this, because I've had 844 in my hands with a shirt. A millimeter of screw up with those kind of weights, especially in the bench press, is failure. And for him to even look pretty good going down and get that close to coming up is impressive as hell. But I knew immediately at that point he was going to fail. My point is that it failed right out of the rack. And the same thing happens with the squats. Most of the time, you can tell by how somebody walks something out if they're going to make it or miss it, just based on how they step and how they brace.
And what I try to harp on that is, for most lifters, they don't put any thought into it. They don't think the lift starts until the judge says, and it's like, no, it has to be set. The steps need to be small. I mean, when I started competing, there were no monoliths.
Right.
You know, so
and I didn't have monoliths in the USAPL. So I squatted 826 at the USAPL Men's Nationals as a junior, which was crazy. But my technical walkout was so perfect. And when you get up to 800 plus pounds on walkouts, you know real fast how important those walkouts are. So I only think you're having that conversation with guys squatting 300, 400, 500.
Oh yeah. Or it's a little bit heavier, but I remember when, because there was no internet at the time, and the gym I was training at, a guy named Jack Buchanan trained there. He played football at Findlay College at the time. And he had a 900-pound squat, and he was kind of part of the crew we were training with, not really, but he watched me and he's like, we spent, oh my God, I bet 2.5 hours. Just, nope, put it back. Nope, put it back. Nope, put it back. Nope, put it back. I'm like, what the? And after that day, I realized this is important.
Well, and I'm glad that you reposted the Learn to Squat video we did 12 years ago, because how long did I spend on him teaching how to set up on the bar?
Exactly.
What, a half an hour? I mean, that whole video reel didn't show it, but I literally taught him from A to Z on squats, and up to R was before he picked up the bar.
Yes.
You know, the SWD, all the rest of the alphabets. That's after you walk it out.
Yes.
Because you would be so surprised at how people set up a little crooked. They don't have their hands right. They don't have their sternum up high. They don't have their back arched.
They haven't figured out when to breathe.
They don't know when to breathe.
You can't.
And that's an art with walking out, because you can't hold your breath the entire time. You have to pick up, walk out, get your feet right, and then reset your air for the squat command. I mean, I couldn't hold my air that long, not with 800 pounds.
What do you want to risk it? Because what if the judge takes extra time?
Because they will.
They give you the command. You know what I'm saying? So you got to figure it out.
Yeah, you judge 200 squats. After a while, you're going to make some, like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I see it all the time.
This is a question that gets thrown out. Where do you see the future of powerlifting going? I know it's a tough one to answer.
Well, I think with not more advancements in pharmaceuticals, I think we're getting close to the human limit of potential. You look at guys like Ray Williams and Vlad. I don't foresee anybody beating their squats anytime soon. The deadlift is one of those other lifts. I think it's going up, but the reason is because powerlifting is becoming popular and it's picking more people out of the woodwork that are properly built to pull.
Well, there was a bar change too.
Yeah, so and that makes a big difference too. And what you start to see is, you're starting to see in powerlifting, at least in my perception, because I don't watch it as much anymore, you start to see these specialists. They're really good at one lift, but they're not. But the total guys aren't really doing that much better, in my opinion. You don't see the totals rising. And to me, I was a powerlifter. I'm a total guy. Yeah, I have world records in the squat, but it was always to hit the total, because, in my opinion, when your focus is the total, your focus is everything, including your weaknesses. When you're, say you could deadlift 950, but your bench is 365, I don't give a fuck what you're doing. It doesn't matter to me, because you're focusing on what you're good at. I like to see people focus on what they need to work on.
Yeah.
That's just been our mentality on how to train.
Well, it's always, I mean, I came in the sport as a power, the total's always been the thing.
Yeah.
You know,
you can have the baddest squat in the world, but if your total's jack shit, I mean,
exactly.
You're a great squatter. Cool.
Yeah, that's why I always wanted to know how to deadlift sumo and conventional. I wanted to be able to know how to bench tucked and feed out, because you don't know what's going to happen, or you have to pivot.
Or look how many times the IPF changed the rules in the last 20 years.
Yeah,
that's insane. I remember we used to be able to bench on our toes, and we had to go back to our feet. Adaptability is key, but that's the thing with training and competing and all that stuff, is being able to adapt. And that's the thing, is like when you do stuff smart, your chances of adapting to what you're doing is much higher. And that's what we're here to do. You're here to adapt to your training and get better. If you're just here to work out hard, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
You need to be having an ability to get better. And that becomes what I feel is what's missing now in powerlifting, is we look towards these genetic freaks that could pretty much train any way they want, and they're going to get a little bit better, or better than most people. But I want to see when you stick and you have maxed out your knowledge and your genetic potential, where do you go now? Because I've hit that 6 or 7 times. I've hit a point when I first squatted my first 1,100 pounds, I was like, I don't have any left. A year and a half later, I squat 1,200 pounds because I had to train less.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what's fucked up, is like people like, oh, I wonder how much harder you had to train to get that 100. I had to train 20% less because I was beat up. So what I found out is I was overtraining to squat 1,100, and I was optimally training to squat 1,200, but the system looked the same.
I think you said a key thing for a lot of lifters that they may not understand is, I've had multiple times like that as well. You know, you hit that number, you're like, well, fuck, you know, but my point is, you know, you had that thought, I had that thought, a lot of other people have that thought. Yep. We all have that thought. It's what you do with it afterwards. You know, so maybe a few days you're like, man, I don't know, my technique was good, nothing broke down.
It was a fucking
and it
grinder.
took everything to get it up. You know, I got to now physically get stronger, and that's the only card I have. But then a few days later, you start really thinking, like, what have I not done? So it's not, I want lifters to understand we all think that, but then we all go back to the drawing board and we have to look at things that we thought we knew for sure.
Yep.
And question everything.
Your circle, your education, and your experience is going to dictate whether you make the right turn or the wrong turn after that point.
And your self-talk. I mean, you're allowed to think that way for a while, but then that narrative has to be, I'm figuring this out.
I mean, and that was the same thing I figured out with the Wenning Warmups, is I had to swallow the pill and say I didn't need to get stronger, I need to get fitter.
Yes.
I needed to figure out a way to be fitter. The strength was already there. And I think that's the biggest problem that people run into, is they're so closed-minded because they don't have that broad education to start going, maybe there's another piece over here. The key is you want to try to find the pieces to get better that don't cost more energy. Because eventually you only have so much. You know, I know there was another question in there talking about, do you believe in Matt only training for an hour? You know, or do you need to train longer than that? And the answer is absolutely. I've done it for 15 years, and I'll tell you why. It forces me to be on time when I train.
Yeah.
I have to be diligent at everything that I'm doing. My rest periods are dialed. The thing I find people tell me they lift 2 hours or something, I could go watch that 2 hour lift and they're wasting 50% of it. So they should really be training an hour. But they're either not fit enough to get all that work in an hour, or they are not thinking about all of the repercussions of lack of recovery. In my opinion, the body can only withstand about 50 to 70 minutes tops of extreme training until it needs to go back into a recovery mode. That's why the Soviets and the Eastern Germans figured out you needed to train twice a day. Because if they split the training up, they would do all the hard, crazy shit in the morning. Then they'd get 6 hours and a nap in, and then they'd come back and do accessories.
I think a lot of people that make that observation, though, need to really, outside of the rest periods and stuff that you're talking about, when do they start? You know what I'm saying? Because they're going to the gym, they're going to fuck around. I know what happens here. I mean, we'll fuck around for an hour, but when do you really start?
Yeah,
and if you look at when you really start compared to when you really end, it's not really over what you're talking about.
No. Well, and you got a great point on that. And this is my point to build on that, is when I go into the gym, and I'm sure the same way because I know you're wired a lot like me, when I step into the gym, I'm in an anxiety state. I want to fucking kill weights. I can't fuck around for an hour because my body is like, you know, like, and I probably learned that a little bit from Chuck. Like, I walk in, it's time to fucking go. Like, I turn on my music, and in about 2 minutes, I'm already sweating because I'm starting to get my shit done. When I walk into the gym, it's all business to me. I have friends in the gym, but we're friends afterward. We talk and sit in the office after training. But to me, if you start keeping your energy in the gym too long, it actually overtrains you just being there. How much anxiety was it to walk into Westside every time?
Well, yeah, 100%.
So you want to be in there another hour? Then you have to be?
Yeah, well, I can't. I mean, here it's different because, it's part of the office where you kind of run into it as well. I have to actually leave the office and come back, right? And then a lot of times you got to wait, for other people to get here. But so I have to flick that switch. Like at Westside is walking through the door, you flick the switch.
Exactly.
I got to flick it at a different time now.
Yeah, but for the normal person, they're not having a job like we have.
No.
So what I'm saying is do not stay in the gym any longer than you have to.
I 100% agree.
Because it will wear you out faster than you possibly imagined.
Yes.
And that's what I'm getting at is, so if you're in there an hour, you don't have time to fuck around. You don't have time to talk and communicate and do all this other shit. I'm talking for the listeners. I see so much wasted energy and time in things that's not making them any better in the gym. And then they're wondering how I get all this shit done in an hour. I mean, I did my workout. It was hard as fuck yesterday, and it was 104 in my gym, about as hot as it was in here, maybe even hotter. And I was done in 52 minutes. And I'm gonna walk you through this. 4 sets of 25 isolateral curls, extensions, and shrugs. Then I deadlifted 6 sets of 8 on deadlifts with 6 chain in the middle, working up to 405 with 6 chain, which is about 520, whatever, for 8 reps. So, 8 reps on sumo deadlift is not any fun.
No.
Then I do 3 accessory exercises, and I have all of that done in 52 minutes. So when did I have time to fuck around?
You don't.
Right.
I mean,
so the point is, now I'm not burned out of going to the gym. But if I sit around and I get that anxiety because I'm, it's like, people ask me all the time, Matt, they have all these local meets, powerlifting meets. Why don't you ever go watch them? Because when I go watch them, I go into contest mode.
I can't do it either.
And I'm watching everybody and I'm like, I will fucking murder everybody in here to squat. You know what I mean? And then I'm watching somebody get buried on a weight. And I'm like, I would have smoked that shit. And then I start walking out and I'm tired. I've actually gave energy to nothing. And that's why I can't watch it. And probably that's my competitive nature. I'm sure Michael Jordan would have a hard time going and watching a basketball game. Because he'd be like, I'd be out there, I could do that better, I could do this. I would have done that. I do that to myself all the time, so I can't watch it,
It's tough. I can't go either for the same reasons. I mean, after I left Westside, I went to a few, just because Chuck was lifting or something like that. But man, it was the same thing. It's like, man, this is exhausting. I try to sit in the back. I try to hide, and just stay away. And then walking in the warm-up room is way worse.
Because the intensity's there and everybody's psyched up and then you get sucked into it. And that's my point is when I walk into my own gym, even though it's where I work now more than where I train, I still get that. And then when I got that, I got to get the hell out because next thing I know, I go home and I'm just staring at a fucking wall. Like I just wore myself out for what? And that's why I think that those training times are so important is because it keeps you away from being able to do that and wear yourself out for no reason.
What are some other things that you think lifters are screwing up on?
Well, I mean, obviously they're taking programs that aren't designed for them or their structural weaknesses. That's a huge one, and you could tell that by half the questions people send in.
Yeah.
They are not understanding what they need at this time. And that becomes very, very frustrating because people think, and people sell that they really think it's that simple to work out smart. It's not. The human body is the most complex organism that we can possibly ever master. I remember having this conversation with a general when I was in charge of 4th Infantry out at Fort Carson, Colorado. And I'm telling him, hey, look, I need to have these guys in about a 2-week class to understand how to train smarter. These are guys that are like majors and colonels and guys that are going to be in charge of PT, right? And he goes, they need 40 hours to understand all this or more? And I'm like, and there's a tank sitting out there. And I'm like, you see that tank? I go, how long does it take to learn how to drive that tank? He goes, oh, that's a pretty complex piece of machinery. That's like a 6-month or a year class. And I was like, human body's 1,000 times more complex than that tank. I mean, if you think about hormones, biomechanics, muscle fiber typing, neurological control, internal and external motor coordination. I mean, you start going into a rabbit hole of insanity. And people really think it's that fucking simple? That you can just go copy Boris Chico's fucking bullshit?
Yeah.
I honestly think that Chico, this is another thing I think I wanted to talk about. I think Chico actually posts those programs just to see if people are stupid enough to do them.
No.
Because I look at them, and I'll be honest with you. At 20 years old, when I was just first getting around Louie, I saw a Chico bench program, and I tried it. And after about 12 weeks of doing it, my shoulders were so fucking grenaded. And I'm like, there's no way in capacity a human can handle this kind of volume. There's no way. So in my opinion, I think that all that shit's bogus because we don't even know if that's translated right. And I know this for a fact because I sent a handful of pictures of A.S. Mevdiev's training books, you know, from Livonia Press.
Yeah.
And sent him the actual Prilepin chart. I sent Verkhoshansky the Prilepin chart. He goes, some of those numbers are not right. So they didn't even copy it right. So what I'm saying is how did Chico's programs get over here? Maybe those numbers are skewed and flipped up and they don't even know it. And that's the problem, is Russian to English is not that easy to translate. So my point is like, you need to be knowing what you need at this time, not just copying somebody else's shit. And that's the hardest part, you know? And that's why I almost never wanted to sell manuals, because I get questions, hey, I'm on the power building manual week 3 and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, did you read the first 10 pages of warning? This is not designed to copy. This is designed to learn from.
Yes.
This is designed as a template to understand volume parameters in this particular block of training that you want to do, and you're copying it verbatim.
Yeah.
There's the problem.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh my God.
Now,
You know
one of
what I
my
mean?
first T-Nation things that I did was like a 8-week sample, you know, program. And then I get all these questions. And I'm like, dude, it's a sample. You know, and I wish if I could go back, I wish I would have just wrote a template, you know, main movement, supplemental exercise, you know, and just, but even that's highly variable.
Yeah. The basic thing is that you need to give somebody a canvas and then show me what paint you're bringing to the table.
Yeah.
Now I can start making the picture. But you can't just make a picture with somebody that doesn't have this type of paint, or however you want to look at the analogy. And that's what people think it is. They think that well, if I got the paint and I can just blah, 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 blah. It doesn't work that way. And the body's not going to adapt to stupid shit it doesn't need after a time. It's going to actually create problems. And that's where, you know, like our online coaching becomes so important, is we take all that stuff into consideration. But, you know, people don't realize that everything at some point needs to be individualized, even at a beginner level, because your technique and my technique when we first started could have been very different. Now, once we harnessed everything down and got to Westside and learned from Louie and Chuck, I would say that our technique looked very similar at our peak. But when we first started, I'll bet it didn't.
No, I was a close stance. I would wear work boots.
Yeah.
You know, I squatted more that way.
How do you convert? You know, like how do you change that? And what are the stepping processes to get to that higher level elite, what I consider elite technical ability? Your way to get there might be different than mine, because the way you started, your weaknesses and strengths are different. And that's the hardest thing to get people to understand, you know. And it was really interesting. So when I was in school with Dr. Kramer, he gave me direct access to Zatsiorsky. So I was so happy I could talk to the guy that wrote the book that Louie copied everything. Not copied, but utilized
I
from.
get it, yeah.
And it was interesting because I would send him at 20 years old, I was sending him questions like we get, and he would come back with the answers that we're giving right now. Well, I need to know more in order for me to help you, because I don't have enough information to tell you what you want to know. And now I'm starting to go, oh, I see. I need to study this. I need to study that. I need to come with a more concise or pinpointed question, because I'm giving him a broad question and he doesn't understand what I'm trying to accomplish. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is where I'm at right now. This is my technical proficiency. Now, how do I fix this? And when I started giving him questions like that, he's like, I'd try this, this, and this, and then pick which one works and go that way. You get what I'm saying?
No, I totally get what you're saying.
So his mentality was so far beyond mine at that point, probably still is. I consider him one of the smartest guys in the world on strength training. I mean, he ran the Central Institute of Physical Culture in Moscow for 30 years, every sport. So the point is like when he started telling me that, it really dialed in the level of questions I needed to get the answers I wanted. So
I think with, you know, to piggyback that off the people, because I don't want people to be super like they can't do, you know, they can't train now, you know, because they don't know anything. I think the takeaway is you got to pay attention. You got to ask, are you moving forward? Are you moving backwards? You know, there's a lot of variables, and just for those people that can't afford coaching or whatever, to just understand the variables that we've been talking about.
Well, think about it like this. Listen twice as much as you speak.
Yes.
How many times you heard that?
Yeah.
Read twice as much as you train.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
If you read twice as much as you're training, if you're watching us right now, you're already ahead of the curveball, because that means they got access to everything you do and everything I do. So the point is now, if you're willing to put the time, effort, and energy into training, why are you not willing to put the time, effort, and energy into reading?
And that's why, again, that's something I've never understood, because it was it still is my passion, but it's kind of not my business, you know. But I'm still spending an hour or more every day just reading shit.
We will always be intrigued, because it's what we always we're always looking for the best way, and there is no best way. I don't want to get anybody misconstrued. There is no best way, but there is always the pursuit of perfection.
Yes.
And you will always find the best way that you know how by having that pursuit of perfection. And that's the thing is, I hate status quo and I hate doing average shit. I've always wanted to do anything I ever did at 100 miles an hour. And whether I crashed and burned or I didn't, I know that I gave all I had.
Yeah.
And to me, I never wanted to leave something on the table that was in a fucking book or waste energy because you know how hard the training was at that point. Why waste the energy?
Yes.
Like if you got to do another set of 1,000-pound squat for a double, but it's not going to make you 1 ounce stronger, why do it?
No, I totally,
and how many times have we fucked that up?
A ton.
And how many times do we try to get other people not to fuck that up?
Yeah, exactly. And with those listening, you can stumble and fall forward for a while. You can, but it's at some point in time it's going to lead you to this point, right? And for me, it was a point that was before I came to Westside, and at that point, anything intelligently put together will get you to that point. Just going in the gym, just doing whatever is not going to get you to that point. We'll get you to that point, but once you hit that point and you just, the clock starts clicking backwards. If you're not expanding the knowledge base because you just grind, you're going to get hurt. Most people are going to be out of the sport 3 years. Once you get to that point, all these things we're talking about matter even at the beginning, but they highly matter at that point. If you want to get to your ultimately best ever, we can probably make an argument that under that point, whatever, you can probably get to that point at the same rate using just about anything, but at what cost? It's a double-edged sword because you have to be patient, but you are on a time clock. Yes.
You will only be 30 years old for 1 year. You'll only be 29 for 1 year. And as those years accumulate, the mileage in which you either did not occur or did occur is going to change how you can adapt to your training, because once your joints are pissed, it doesn't matter how big and strong your muscles are, you're not going to squat maximum weights. You're not going to bench maximum weights. If your shoulders feels grenaded, your bench just drops 100 pounds. There's just certain types of level of pain in the joint that the body's just not going to let you work through. And you need to stay away from those particular areas. And I find that a lot of the training protocols are going back into the archaic days from 50 years ago, and not in Soviet Union 50 years ago, like the stupid shit, the guys were doing in the 60s and 70s. Those things, what you start realizing is the mileage that they're incurring in that is never going to let them get to genetic potential because they're not going to last long enough.
No, I feel Louie felt the same way. A lot of those guys could have been better.
Oh, way better.
Way better. But
imagine how strong would have Kaz been if he'd have trained smart.
Yes.
I talk to him about that personally at SWIS every year. He pats me on the back. He's like, "You're the most solid dude I've ever seen," even though he was way bigger than me. He's still bigger than me. And I'm like, "Yeah, man, it's training smart." He goes, "Well, where have you had injuries and fucked up?" I'm like, "Nowhere." He goes, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man." I was like, "Something hurts. I back off. I change this. I move that. I just work around it." And he goes, "Nah, we didn't do that back in the day. We just worked right through the pain and beat shit up." And he goes, "And now I wish I'd have trained like you."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is. It's, that's the last way you want to learn.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was the biggest compliment, not only from him, because he was my idol as a kid. I mean, when he was in his prime, I was just 10 years old. But what I started to realize was when I did those seminars with Ed Cohen and Paula Quinn overseas, every class that they ended with, the biggest pat on the back I've ever had is Paula Quinn and Eddie goes, "If I had to do over again, I'd have trained like Matt." Because Eddie can't hardly wash his hair anymore. He's all beat up. Charles Poliquin's all beat up. I saw him get crushed with like a 250-pound squat because his knees were bad, because he was letting his knees go way over his fucking toes every time he squatted. And I'm not saying you don't squat like that occasionally, but that's what he thought. And I said, he goes, "How bad are your knees from doing all those big squats?" I said, "They're not bad at all because I sit back and keep my shin straight." He just looks at me kind of confused. And I said, "Let me show you how I do it." So in between the classes, I would show him how to squat with this vertical shank. And if you look at Ed Cohen, he never let his shins come forward either. And how long did he last? And I started showing him all this, and he's like, you changed my thought process on what I thought. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with how you squat, but the wrong mindset is the same way all the time. If I want to squat your style, I can still do 600. You come and squat my style, you're going to get cut in half of what you can do. And so it's not impressive. And that's the thing is, like, where are your weaknesses and how do you train them? So I'm not saying that letting your shins go over your knees or your toes every once in a while is not it's not the worst idea, but it's the worst idea to do it all the time. Mm-hmm. It's like any movement pattern.
Well, yeah, exactly. I was going to say that's anything.
Overuse it and watch what happens.
Yes, it's like no exercise is bad. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? But done all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem that you have. So my thought process is, keep everything variable. Make sure that you're doing things that are attacking your weaknesses. Make sure that you're reading more than you're training, so that way you're doing things smarter and learning. I mean, I still hold back about an hour and a half, 2 hours a week to read. And what do I need to know anymore? I'm fucking retired, and I probably have a pretty good base of understanding training, more than I'd say 99% of the people in the profession. But I am intrigued. I know that there's other nuggets out there that I don't know, and that's what keeps me hungry.
Now, some of these rabbit holes, like you said, when you go to SWIS or something like that, you get exposed. Holy shit! Oh, oh god.
Well, you could spend an entire lifetime just studying 2 hormones.
Yes.
And how it affects the cells. Like, we always talk about testosterone, and we all know what it does. We've taken it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's still so many variables, right? Does testosterone really cause all these heart issues? I'm not so sure. Because why would we be prescribing it now as an anti-aging drug? I mean, back when you and I were at Westside, if we'd have got busted with the vials that we had, we'd have went to prison. Now we just been anti-aging.
Yeah.
And I saw other questions on there about, they were talking about drug usage. And we all had to use them to be at the level we were at. But I always got more out of less. Because if I didn't feel athletic and I felt like I couldn't breathe, or I felt my blood pressure was too high, I was weaker, no matter how much that took. But I never could understand. I had been in a couple of seminars, we don't need to name names, of the top lifters at that time, raw, back in the early 2012 to 14, and they're prescribing people to take 1 gram of test per 100 pounds of body weight. And I'm like, fuck that.
So I didn't understand a lot of that shit either, because, I erred on the wrong side and learned the same way everybody else does. Like, I can't breathe.
Right.
And some of the things too, I remember, we would switch out and we'd take Anadrol before meet. So it's just a 50 milligram tablet or whatever. And it'd be like last 4 weeks, fucking muscle pulls, people's noses are bleeding all over. And, Louie's like, this shit, this shit has to stop. You can't, you guys are fucking, because everybody's like getting hurt and all this. And I'm like, well, fuck it. We'll just take half, or we won't do it at all, and switch it out. And then I'll hear things like, oh yeah, so-and-so's taking 300 milligrams. And I'm like, how in the hell are they doing that? Because it's, what I learned is you can't, like you said, you can't breathe. No. If I can't breathe, there's not enough oxygen to recover. So my recovery was tanking.
Yep. There you go.
So I had to find this optimal range.
There's a sweet spot. And the problem with the sweet spot is it's different for everybody. In my opinion, once you go over 1,000 on your blood work on test, so an average person's between like 250 and 800. Once you go over 1,000, it's diminished returns, just like anything else. Right? Just because you can do 20 sets of squats, like you and Chuck probably did that one time, it doesn't mean that 8 sets you could have stopped and probably got better.
No, that was stupid. I mean, that was just the shit that would happen that we were talking about. Did it help? Did it not help?
But the problem with our society, whether it's training or drugs, is we think more is better. And in reality, only optimal is better. And once you hit that optimal point, and I want to make another big statement on this, is drugs, in my opinion, are only give you a capacity of maybe 10 or 15% more than what you got now. Do not take that shit when you bench 300.
Oh yeah.
You're going to bench 350. Who gives a shit? Yeah. Now, if you're benching 585 raw and you take drugs, you can bench 700. I understand that equation. I do not understand the equation. I mean, half the people that ask us about drugs, they're not even in the zone to take those fucking drugs.
Well, that, and I also say you can only flip that card once.
Only once.
Right? So the one thing the example I've noted many times is when I was sponsoring lifters and the WPO was big.
Yeah.
A bunch of them came up to me. I mean, just through the years, and they tell me they're drug free, and I'm like, there's no goddamn way they're lifting what they're lifting.
Yeah.
And then over a period of probably 9 to 12 months, each one of them said, I think it's time for me to go on. And it made me mad, because I'm like, I felt like you all think I'm fucking stupid, like this is some joke that they're making, like this is bullshit.
Yeah.
And every one of them's total went up over 250 pounds. And I'm like, holy shit.
Maybe they were.
They were, and I'm like, I can't believe that. But that card can only be turned once.
Yep.
The other thing I did notice was, when I aired on the other side where I couldn't recover and all the other stuff, the injuries and all the other stuff, I had to find a higher dose, I bloated more. So then it's, okay, I need to find this optimal range, but another way to get bloated, because that bloat, it changes leverage.
Well, and then once you're dealing with equipment, maybe your equipment doesn't fit anymore.
Exactly.
And that's a big problem too. That's why you saw so many guys in that era not be able to touch in their shirts, is because they'd be at one size to fit the shirt. They might touch, say, 700. Then they get on a bunch of Anadrol or whatever. They get puffy, and now they're an inch and a half thicker. Well, in a denim shirt, you're fucked. So that was the big issue with the equipment side. On the raw side, I think the drugs were more crazy when I went into raw than they were in equipped.
Really?
Oh, by far. The stuff I was telling you about 100,000 milligrams per 100 pounds body weight, I was hearing that from raw lifters, like top guys. And I'm like, there's no fucking way I'm taking that much, number one. Number two, how can you even feel like you can finish a meet, let alone squats?
Well, I question if it's real.
Yeah, then you wonder if it's real. But then my question is why, and I've never been this way, but if it wasn't real, why would you stand up and tell 30 people that?
Yeah.
Because to me, that wouldn't be a terrible thing to do, because now you're putting everybody's health at risk to tell a lie.
Yeah, I don't know if they know it's real or not. You know, to be honest, they may think it is, but that was like the Anadrol thing. You know, and even like the D-ball type thing. It's, you know,
I always, well, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would see so many people take, you know, say one Anadrol and then go to two Anadrol, and shit would be tearing and noses would be bleeding, and then all of a sudden 100 milligrams is a normal dose, but people need to take 200-300. I'm questioning if it's actually
real,
that,
or if it's a 10 mil and they think it's a 50. Yeah, and I agree with that. And for those listening, Anadrol, in my opinion, is the most powerful anabolic oral steroid. But the problem with it is that most people don't understand is, one, you can only load it for a very short period of time, and two, the adrenal fatigue associated with Anadrol post-cycle is nothing short of insane. I remember, like, I'd get done with a meet, and I'd run a half, do a 25, half of 50 milligram Anadrol 5 days out, and I was fucking, like, depressed for about 3 weeks after a contest. And then I try it without the Anadrol and no depression. And I'm like, this stuff's not good for the average person at all. Like, I would say if the one drug to stay away from, unless you're trying to break an all-time world record, is do not fucking touch Anadrol. Yeah,
but there's a whole bunch of people with the mentality that are going to hear that and say, well, that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we're trying to say is it's for recovery.
Yeah.
If you're recovering from session to session and you have built-in ways to know, right? For me, you know, my max effort, if my max effort was going well, my speed went well on speed day. Yeah. If my max effort was going to shit, I knew, you know, or if my speed work was going to shit, I had to look at the max effort day, and vice versa.
Yeah. They're both synergistic.
Yes. So that way I had checks and balances. Am I recovering? Is this moving forward? And at certain points, am I moving forward too fast? Because if I am, I better slow it down.
Well, that's another key point, because like you're hitting on, muscles grow faster than ligaments and tendons. Yes. So if you're getting extremely strong, extremely fast, you better watch the connective tissue, because now you're going to have injuries. And that's what I'll go into my personal experience. I squatted 826 in the IPF completely drug-free. Whether you can believe it or not, it doesn't matter. I take my first cycle, I go to my first WPO semifinals in 2004, and I squat 903. Pretty big jump. But after that point, I went from 900 in 1 year to 920 to 980 to 1,003 to 1,030 to 1,050, 1,085. The first year I broke the all-time world record in the total. 1,100, 1,110, and then it took me 12 months later to squat 1,200. My point is, I only ever got that one big jump one time. The rest of it took a year to put another 50 pounds on, which if you have a good training cycle and you're at that level, 50-pound gain in a squat in 12 months is really good.
That's really good. That's what I don't think people, now if your technique's off, you can jump faster, but that's why when we hit those points that we were talking about earlier, that's why we're both, you know, our minds are like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, well, believe it if you want, but 826 to 903 was, I took 2 cc's of Cypionate, and then I would load this half of a 50 milligram Anadrol about 2 weeks out. And I did that my entire fucking career. So I knew after about 950, it wasn't the drugs anymore. It was a training.
Yes.
Because I had all the factors accounted for, and the drugs stayed the same, because every time I tried to ramp it up, I would never ramp it up close to a meet because I didn't know how it would affect me. So I would try different things in the off season and realize, no, this makes me feel way too bad. I can't do this. I had to feel athletic walking on the stage, not bloated and fucked up. And that's what people don't understand. The drugs really only enhance the bloating and the fucked up. And if that level's too high and the blood pressure's too much and your heart rate's too high, you're not recovering from anything. And that's where the drugs actually reverse. So there's only that optimum amount. Now, here's the thing. I think pro bodybuilders tend to be able to take way more genetically and have an advantage to that, and not have as many, obviously with a lot of the deaths lately, but you see guys that are bodybuilders can take more milligrams and it tends to put on more mass. But for powerlifting, you have to be very careful because you have to still feel athletic. And that's what I have seen over the years talking with Flex and Stan is like, when you're training like a bodybuilder, because you do a little bit more isolated type shit, it doesn't matter you can't breathe. When you're under a squat with 1,000 pounds and balance is crucial for you to survive, it's a big difference.
The other big takeaway is with all those money meets, when they started coming in, the multiply money meets, the biggest thing I would tell all the guys that I was sponsoring, however you want to say that, was whoever goes in the healthiest wins. Bottom line. You know, because you're in the warm-up room and, oh, my back's jacked. Well,
but you saw me at all those prize money meets. How much healthier did I look than everybody else?
Yes. Well, joint health, everything. You know, how many things.
And who won?
Exactly.
See?
You know, that's the thing is everybody's going to have, you know, scrapes and dings going into a meet. It's normal. But whoever has the least at that level wins. Whoever can breathe and recover between squat and bench and dead wins. You know, so it wasn't at that level so much about getting stronger. It's going in to display the strength you haven't been able to display in the past because you weren't conditioned, you were too beat up, or whatever it was.
Or you didn't approach it strategically.
Yes.
Right.
And I think a lot of lifters fuck up too because they'll go to a meet, say it's leveled down, say they go to the meet and they smoke 700. Well, then they base all their training off 780. They could have done. It's like, well, no, you did the 700. You know, I could make an argument. You might want to base your training if you smoked it on exactly what you did, or maybe even a little less.
So that's a great point. So I'll give you another big gold mine tip. So when I would train for a contest, I would when I hit the first world record raw squat, for example, I did 832. When I did that, the next cycle to squat 865 and break the record again, I based it off of 800, not 832. All the numbers to the training, because I knew that saving that 30 pounds, or let's just say 5% off of that top, I was always going to recover better from the workouts. And I was less beat up.
You know, that was one of the conversations that after I squatted 9, Louie and I were driving back from Harrisburg, and it was easy. And I'm already like, man, we should do you know, what cycles we should do. And he's like, well, what do you think you could have squatted? And I'm like, you tell me. I don't fucking remember. I don't see it. So, well, you could have squatted 940, 950.
Was that at the Mountaineer?
No, this was at the IPA Nationals in Harrisburg.
Got it.
And he said, well, you could have squatted 950. And I'm like, well, then I'm like, he's like, no, listen to me. You don't hear what I'm saying. Why don't you do the same shit again and actually get the 950 instead of increasing
and possibly overtrain and get beat up or injured?
But then, you know, 3 years later, we end up putting 800 more pounds on bar. You know, so, and that made sense to me because it's like, okay, this makes sense. I don't have to change this final 4-month dynamic wave. That can stay the same. If I go in exactly the same condition, and which isn't easy, but do that, then pick up what I should have had. That's less wear and tear.
Absolutely.
You know, and that made sense. You know, it's like, okay, cool, I get that. But most people, I don't think, understand that.
I say shave 5% off of your all-time best and use your training percentages based on that number. Maybe even 10%.
Well, the other thing you talked about a little bit is there is a huge difference between a competitive max and training max.
Yeah, so if you want to get into that, so we actually have 3 different maximums. If you look up a lot of the high-level books, you have absolute strength. That is where tissue fails.
Nobody gets there.
Nobody gets there. That's like hooking a car battery to your fucking leg and watching it blow off the bone. That's absolute. So your competition max is what you can neurologically activate at 100% at your brain, not something external. And you can only utilize that. This is actually pretty interesting. Eddie Cohen and I talked about this at a seminar we did together. You only have 10 of those in your whole life of real, true competition maximums. You only have 10, and then you're burned out. He said, I can remember every one of those 10 that I used. Now, he broke 70-something world records, but not all of those were as hard as he could go. And so he said he only had 10 of those. Now, my point is with that being said, that means we can't use it very often. Now, training maximum in the books and in my personal opinion, means technical proficiency with anything above 9 RPE or 90%.
Yes.
Because that's what you can recover from. So it's a training modality. And that's where everybody fucks up. So when they see max effort work, they think, oh, well, you know, I should go as hard as I can. No, you should go as hard as you can recover from, which is probably 90%.
Yeah. And this is for those listening, when we were talking about reading and all this others, this isn't like some shit we're making up. This is in a lot of, it's in super training. Well, it's in a lot of these other books.
And this is where it's difficult and why people say, well, did you read this paper on why this doesn't work or that doesn't work? Then you look at the sample size. Why the Soviet data is so impeccable is because it's basing it off of thousands of athletes, not 10. And now in science here in the States and other countries, if you got 10 or 15 people in the study for 8 to 10 weeks, you got a great study. That didn't mean shit in the Soviet Union. You needed thousands of people under severe control to actually state that this worked or that worked. So why read anything that's new other than to brush up on maybe something? But like, you know, I posted a thing on training with bands and it shows a dramatic increase in power output, but not maximum strength. But then you look at the paper, and the reason I posted it is because a handful of people were like, well, yeah, but look, their strength didn't go up. Look how long the fucking paper was being studied. Yeah,
and it's one paper. I mean, you got to look at a meta-analysis and stuff like that where, you know, I'm going to pimp out the MASS journal. It's Stronger by Science, Greg Nuckols and Eric Helms. It's really, really good because a lot of the stuff they put in there, it's, you know, analyzing the studies and then breaking it down and putting in multiple, you know, to be able to.
And we had to do that for a whole semester in grad school. But what you start realizing is there's faults in every paper.
All of them. All of them
have faults. And that's the thing is you need to be right in the middle of meathead and science.
Yes.
And the meathead comes from experience only.
Yes.
So a lot of times people will say something like, well, Matt does that. There's no scientific data on that. Well, in some ways you need to have stuff. Well, I have a fucking world record. You don't.
Well, there's an art and a science.
And then that's the art. And then the other side is, okay, I'm going to read this and study it and get better at it. And maybe this is leading me down another path that I didn't think about. So it's having a delicate balance, but basing it all on science, you're going to have a problem. And being all meathead, you're going to have a problem.
100%.
You have to be in the middle. And that's where it's difficult because really, we can't really prove what you and I did other than what we done.
No. I mean, you know? when Louie started strapping, you know, chains and bands and all that stuff, and there were no studies for that. No. You know, and the backlash I was getting at the time when I was online was unfucking believable. Like, whatever, I'm not changing it. And then it was maybe a decade later, I started to see studies pop up in the NSCA journal. Some pro, some con. You know, and I'm like, okay, well, here's a pro one. Like, oh, so, okay, a lot of this stuff, you know, is years ahead. And then the Soviets were using this shit long ago, too. So they're if you dig back and who can get there, you know what I'm saying?
The first book I remember seeing was probably published in 80 or 82, and they didn't talk about bands. They said cords.
There are cords. I also saw tubes, like bike tubes.
Bike tubes,
you know, bike tubes. You know, I would read about that.
And then Alexiev was using water.
Yes.
So he would build a pool and had stainless weights, and then he would use water drag, which is changing the way the resistance functions because the water drag is causing issues.
Yes.
With basically accommodative resistance. And then once it broke the water, now it's just the weight.
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
Yeah. And well, you keep going back, there's the cam, you know, that came out through Nautilus. You know, so it's all there. It's just because it wasn't with this modality, you know, all those people, that's bullshit, it's bullshit. Like, whatever, think what you want. You know, we're all breaking records. And so I think Louie, you know, he received a lot of criticism that he really shouldn't have gotten, you know, at the time for all that. Now, he had other things which are whacked, which he admits to, you know, 100%. But you're only you got to have a lot of different things that you're playing around with.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is you know, and let's just say for the sake of saying that bands and chains don't work. The only reason let's just say for this sake, they may have just worked because they're just a different environment.
Yes.
You have to master a new environment. And we talk about law of accommodation constantly. Straight weight acts a certain way under gravity. So if you change it by putting bands and chains on it, let's just say they don't work because of the reasons people say, it's still a different environment. And it's still close enough to create transfer.
Yeah, if you want to talk specificity.
So whether you fucking believe in bands or chains or not, you probably ought to have them in your training just for an environmental change.
You make a good point because those same people will say a front squat will help build, and maybe even a safety squat bar will help Bell because it's specificity.
Yeah.
Well, this is still, let's assume it doesn't work for the, like you said. It's get more specific than that.
Yeah.
The movement pattern really doesn't change. It's more of a specific movement pattern than a front squat.
I know.
So it makes it.
Yeah. So that's the thing is I think, just keep an open mind with your training. Try to figure out, there's going to be things that don't work for you. I personally like chains more than bands, mostly because being a gym owner, you can't fuck up chains. You can run them over with your car and pick them up. Bands, you got to be careful with. So I noticed with firemen and stuff, I have to be careful with bands because they're just beat them up. But the bands tend to have more elastic energy, which I think creates more central nervous system fatigue than chains. But they also can create a high level of peaking if you know how to use them correctly, which I saw another question about circuit max and should it be done? Absolutely. The reason is your body has to overreach at some point to make new progress. One way to do that is to circuit max and create high tension so the central nervous system, here's my thought process, and I don't think anybody studied it, but if you take a bar off and let's say you got 900 pounds of tension at the top, when you go down, let's just say that band's half and let's say it's 750, your brain doesn't know it's not still 900. So that means it's activating all the tissue thinking it's squatting 900. So what happens when your old max was say 750 and now you squat 785? Well, some of that could become from central nervous system adaptation, and now you're innervating more tissue because the band has allotted you a new neural pathway. That's why it works, in my opinion. It doesn't make you stronger, but it allots a better motor unit pathway to innervate more tissue. So by doing that, you can't tell, you can't feel, like if I pick up, 600 and 300 pounds of band, I get to the bottom, I can't feel those bands getting looser. It feels like I'm gonna fucking die.
Yeah.
Well, when that happens, then now your body is neurologically prepping to squat a heavier weight. The problem is, though, is you can only use it in very sparse amounts because it's so overreaching that it will overtrain like that.
Yeah, and going into it, you better make sure the shoulder mobility is good, your upper back strong. You got to predict the weak points. Because those issues are what get beat the most.
And we never used more than 35-40% band tension to weight ratio. And that's probably the same for you guys too. When I squatted 1197, I did, I want to say 855 with a blue, green, orange. So 350 pounds of band, right?
Yeah.
With 800 pounds of weight, there you go. That made a 1,200 pound squat. It was a little like 1260 or something at the top, but you get my point.
Yeah.
I didn't have 700 pounds of band and 405 on the bar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think you need 60-something% weight with 40% band. That gives you, allots you the right amount of neurological adaptation.
Yeah, I was definitely part of the crew that failed on the other end of that, where there's like 315 and 500 pound of band tension. I mean, just ridiculous amounts of shit.
You got to try new things sometimes.
Yeah.
You guys were the ones that were kind of the guinea pigs.
Yeah.
And we were the ones that had a little bit more of the blueprint.
Yes.
You know?
I know there's tons of manuals on your site right now. What are things that you're working on currently? Is there any new stuff that you're working on?
Because I train so many people, especially at Reichert, that are administration, they don't have an athletic background or they're older, I'm working on a retirement manual that's made for people that's never worked out, but they're getting close to retirement age and they don't want to get beat down so much and they want to retain muscle mass and bone density. I saw my grandma pass away a couple weeks ago, and I was always trying to get her to be more physically active, but she was in that generation that just didn't give a fuck. And I'm trying to save this next generation from that happening. And so I'm making a manual on that. I also have a manual that we just came out with, which was the over 40 manual, which I actually designed for Stone Cold Steve Austin. He reached out to me and asked me to make him something to train with. And that was interesting because he's beat the fuck up.
Oh yeah.
And so I designed that, but then I decided to make it a over 40 manual and change it so it's not so specific to his needs. I got another manual I'm working on too. Oh, I'm doing a mass manual. So I have a power building manual and a hypertrophy manual, but this manual is actually how I'm training right now, which is a lot of weird things that I've learned or researched, and is actually experimental because some of these cycles that I'm doing right now I haven't ever played with, which is actually, I can tell because my muscles kind of doing a WTF type thing. Like, it's like, I'm used to all this other shit you're doing, and now you're like stretching in between sets. I'm not used to that. And I'm doing like very slow tempo shit. So now for speed work, I'm doing 10 count down, 10 count up.
Okay.
Which I never did concentric tempos. So what I'm trying to do is throw a lot of spokes or wrenches in the spokes. Get my body to go, what the fuck are you doing, right? So that's like a mass building program that I'm designing right now, which I think will at least open the eyes for people to see different templates and loading parameters where they can get new stimulation. Because for a lot of us, we've done the same thing for so long. How do you stimulate new growth but not ignore basic scientific principles to make sure that when you go back to training for a powerlifter or an athlete, it doesn't matter, that those things will transfer.
Or just from myself speaking, keep it in a challenging way.
Absolutely.
Like, give me something that I got to train hard for, which isn't going to beat the absolute living shit out of myself.
Exactly. So the off-season manual I designed last year, I don't know if you got that one, but I did split Hatfield squats, safety bar, 500 for 5 each leg. Single-legged, 500 for 5.
Yeah.
And I got a video. I was hoping that video would go viral because I don't know how many fucking people can do that.
Not many.
But yeah, it was fucking berserk. And my left hip still is paying for it a little bit. So I'm trying to make manuals for all kinds of different parameters and different goals. So that way people can at least have a blueprint. Again, getting messages all the time. Hey, I'm on week 3, week 5. Dude, it wasn't designed like that. It was designed for make you think. And that's why I put so much science and begin at like references and theories. And, so some of it has stuff that Paul Quinn talks about. Some of it's like Joe Ken stuff. Some of it's Mike O'Hearn. Like how they change. I mean, they all train different.
Yes.
But really the optimal is a hybrid of how everybody intertwines all of that. And that way your body's always constantly trying to adapt to something new. And so that's all those manuals that I have on my website, other than like the retirement manual, obviously, I have done personally and absolutely dialed into a T. Now, it was dialed in for me at that time, but I had 15, 20 other guys on at the same time, who are all different ages and abilities, and they all got better. So I'm like, okay, we're on to something. So usually when I design a manual, I will not publish it unless I know it worked for 15 people in my gym. Then I will publish it, because now I know it's pretty foolproof. Yeah. Versus just having some theory of shit that I don't know if it works or not, right?
Yes. And for the guys watching this on YouTube, he does have a YouTube channel. It's
where most of the questions you ask are already on there.
And the content is really good. I mean, it's I see the comments where people are, ripping him for the Patreon and all that kind of stuff. The content on his YouTube channel is really good. Yeah. And then the subscribers don't what I want to say, it doesn't match what that content really is on there. And that's just the nature of,
education.
We run into the same thing with our YouTube channel, trying to grow that as well.
Well, that the problem is that YouTube is not very good at promoting education. They want to promote stupid shit.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that you and I are fighting. We're trying to make everybody better and smarter. And I'm going to be serious, like social media wants everybody fucking stupid.
Well, yes, and the drama, they'll promote the drama and stuff like that. So my point is go watch and subscribe to the YouTube.
So it's Winning Strength. Yeah. We got probably over 300 videos on there with all different types of topics, and some of it's opinion and some of it's fact. Like, some of it's got backing, some of it's just stuff I've experienced over time. But I try to make it as vast as I possibly can. I truly think that if somebody watched all 300 videos, they'd have a really good understanding on how to train. Would you agree?
Oh, they'd have a very good understanding on how to train. I mean, it's basically everything in there's covered. All the stuff that we talked about's in there. Some of the other stuff we expanded on a little bit more, but it's a great resource that everybody should use. And it's not just the one takeaway I want people to have from this is this is training. Everybody wants to like group conjugate in this freaking box. I mean, what we're talking about are, I think, basic training principles that apply to all.
There are rules, methodologies, and thought processes that should apply no matter what your training philosophy is.
Exactly.
Period.
And that's a lot of what we talked about here. It's this conjugate thing, and I'm afraid it's just going to keep growing and become so watered down and diluted that. Hell, I realized that when I was sponsoring people. They said, well, yeah, I train conjugate. Then I look at how they train. I'm like, you do board presses. That's not, so
they're linking exercises with the type of training, when in reality, that's not the basis of it at all.
Yeah. So a lot of the things that we talked about are they can be rabbit holes that you should go down and you should discover, and look and see and educate yourself and move forward from them. It's been too long, man. It's great to catch up with you. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, anytime.
And anything else you want to say before we?
No, I'm just glad that we're I've been somewhat a part of Elite FTS for 15 years.
Yeah, a long time.
And we just need to do more shit together. you know, when our time allots, it's hard, you know, with all of us being so busy.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm just right down the road. So if you ever need to get out of here and come train, or maybe I'll come out here and work out a little bit every once in a while.
That's cool. I appreciate it. We're done.
That's a good one.